Welcome to Luke's Stories, where camping isn't all about campfires and stars, but also nightmares in the dark. My name is Benjamin Thomas, and I'm 33 years old. This happened last October during a solo trip to Clifty Falls State Park in southern Indiana. I went there to clear my head, maybe even find some peace after a rough divorce. I'm a photographer, always searching for the perfect shot, and I thought the park's famous waterfalls and gorges would provide the kind of distraction I needed. Instead, I found something I can't explain, something I wish I could forget. I rented an old RV for the trip. It wasn't much, a creaky, faded box with a sputtering generator, but it suited my needs. I parked it at a campsite near Tunnel Falls, far from the main campground. I wanted solitude, and I got it. Too much of it. I arrived at the park in the late afternoon. The sun was low, casting long shadows over the winding trails and dense forest. I stopped by the visitor center to grab a map, where I met Kevin, the park ranger. He was a tall guy in his 40s with a weathered face and a no-nonsense demeanor. "You camping near Tunnel Falls?" he asked as he handed me the map. "Yeah, I figured it'd be quiet out there." He gave me a strange look, like he wanted to say something but thought better of it. Finally, he said, "Just be careful near the gorge. Trails can be tricky, especially if you're hiking alone." "Thanks, I'll be careful," I said, folding the map and heading out. I wasn't worried. I'd been hiking and photographing wilderness for years. I knew how to handle myself, but as I left I could feel his eyes on me, like he was watching a man walking toward a trap. After setting up the RV, I grabbed my camera and headed out to explore. The trails were beautiful, winding through vibrant autumn foliage. The air was crisp and cool. I felt a sense of peace for the first time in months. That was until I heard it. At first it sounded like singing, faint and melodic, drifting through the trees. I froze, listening, but it stopped. I shook my head and kept walking, telling myself it was just my imagination. But a few minutes later I heard it again, closer this time. "Hello," I called out, my voice echoing off the trees. No response, just the rustling of leaves in the breeze. I kept walking, my unease growing. Then I saw her. She was standing near the edge of the gorge, her back to me. A young woman, barefoot, wearing a dress that looked like it belonged in a century-old photograph. Her hair was long and damp, clinging to her back like she'd just stepped out of the water. "Are you okay?" I called out. She didn't move. "Do you need help?" I tried again, stepping closer. That's when she turned to look at me. Her face was pale, her eyes dark and hollow. She didn't say a word, just stared at me for a moment before stepping into the mist and vanishing. I ran to the spot where she'd been standing, my heart pounding, but there was nothing there. No footprints, no sign of her at all. Back at the RV, I tried to shake off the encounter. I told myself she must have been another hiker, though I couldn't explain how she disappeared so quickly. I reviewed the photos I'd taken that day, hoping they'd distract me. But when I scrolled through the images, my stomach dropped. In several of the shots, there was something wrong with the mist near the gorge. It looked distorted, like faces were forming in the fog. One of them was unmistakably the woman I'd seen, her hollow eyes staring back at me through the screen. I slammed the laptop shut, my hands shaking. That night, the RV felt colder than it should have. I double-checked the heater, but it seemed to be working fine. Still, I couldn't shake the chill. As I lay in bed, I heard it again, faint singing drifting through the night. I tried to tell myself it was the wind, but it didn't sound like the wind. Then came the knocking, soft at first, like someone tapping on the RV's door. I froze, holding my breath. The tapping grew louder, more insistent. "Who's there?" I called out, grabbing a flashlight. No answer. I opened the door, shining the light into the darkness. No one was there. But on the ground, just outside the RV, I saw wet footprints leading away toward the gorge. The next day I tried to convince myself I'd imagined it all. Maybe the stress of the divorce was messing with my head. I headed out again, determined to focus on my photography. But as I neared Big Clifty Falls, I saw her again. She was standing in the water this time, just below the falls. Her dress was soaked, clinging to her thin frame. She looked up at me, her dark eyes meeting mine. "Please," she said, her voice soft and trembling. "I'm lost. Can you help me?" I hesitated, every instinct screaming at me to stay away, but I couldn't just leave her there. "Where are you trying to go?" I asked, stepping closer. She didn't answer. Instead, she turned and began walking, motioning for me to follow. I hesitated, but eventually followed her off the trail, deeper into the woods. She led me to the edge of another gorge, then stopped. "This is where it happened," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "What happened?" I asked. She turned to face me, her expression twisted with grief and anger. "They left us here. They left us to die." Before I could respond, she vanished again, leaving me alone near the edge. That night, the RV became a prison. The whispers started just after sunset, faint at first but growing louder. They seemed to be coming from all directions, surrounding me. I covered my ears, but it didn't help. "Benjamin," they whispered, "come to us." The pounding started again, this time on every wall of the RV. I grabbed my camera, desperate to document whatever was happening, but when I tried to take a photo, the camera refused to work. Through the window, I saw shadows moving in the trees, shapes that looked human but weren't. Desperate for answers, I grabbed a flashlight and headed toward the gorge. The whispers guided me, growing louder the closer I got. At the edge, I saw them, figures climbing the cliffs, their bodies twisted and broken. Among them was Claire, her face pale and wet. "Why are you doing this?" I demanded. Her expression softened, and for a moment I saw the sadness beneath the rage. "We were abandoned," she said. "They left us here to starve, and now we are not alone." The shadows surged toward me, their hands clawing at my arms and legs. They tried to drag me toward the edge, their strength overwhelming. In a last-ditch effort, I swung the flashlight wildly. The beam of light scattered the figures. Claire screamed, her voice echoing through the gorge. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I ran back to the RV, my heart pounding, and drove out of the park without looking back. I never returned to Clifty Falls. I sold my camera equipment, unable to look at another photo without thinking of those faces in the mist. But sometimes, late at night, I hear the whispers again, soft, faint, and calling my name. My name is Jennifer Graham, and I'm 30 years old. This happened in late October last year during a camping trip I should have said no to. Looking back now, I wish I had trusted my instincts. But when your boyfriend insists, and his plan includes his best friend and an RV, you shrug and say, sure, why not? What could possibly go wrong? We were heading to the Glade Top Trail in Mark Twain National Forest, Missouri. It was one of those scenic, out-of-the-way places Travis found online while scouring for hidden gems. He was always chasing after some unspoiled piece of wilderness he could claim he'd conquered. He thought this trip would be perfect, a 4-day getaway with me, his best friend Eli, and Eli's sister, Hannah. I liked camping, but not like this, not with Travis's demanding itineraries where relaxing meant hiking until your legs felt like jelly and eating instant noodles by firelight. Eli was just as much of a wild card. He was funny, sure, but in that irresponsible, forget-everything-important kind of way. And Hannah? Sweet girl, but quiet. She mostly stayed behind her camera, snapping pictures of sunsets and deer. The first day went smoothly enough. We parked the RV in a clearing off the trail, surrounded by trees turning gold and orange in the autumn chill. Travis was in his element, barking orders and setting up camp. Eli fumbled through his backpack, realizing he'd forgotten fuel for the portable stove. "Guess it's campfire cooking then," he joked, earning a glare from Travis. "Relax, man, it's just food." Hannah wandered off to take photos while Travis grumbled about having to adjust the meal plan. I tried to smooth things over, but I could feel the tension already brewing. That night, the forest came alive with strange sounds. The crackle of our fire barely masked the occasional rustling in the bushes or the distant hoots of owls. At one point we heard whistling, high and sharp, like someone calling for a dog. We all froze. "Probably the wind," Travis said, poking the fire. Eli smirked. "Or a ghost. Isn't this place supposed to be haunted?" "Stop it," I snapped, but even I couldn't shake the chill that ran down my spine. The second day started with an ambitious hike. Travis insisted we take a trail that wasn't marked on the map, claiming it would lead to a hidden overlook. The trail was narrow and rocky, winding through dense trees that seemed to close in on us the further we went. Hannah stopped often to take pictures, capturing the way the light filtered through the leaves. She lingered behind, so I stayed with her while Travis and Eli forged ahead. I didn't mind the slower pace. Something about the forest felt off. The trees were too still, the silence too heavy. No birds chirped, no squirrels darted across the path, just the crunch of our boots and the occasional click of Hannah's camera. By the time we caught up with the others, they were standing at the edge of a clearing, staring at something. A deer stood frozen in the middle of the trail, its head tilted unnaturally to the side. It didn't move, even when we got closer. "That's weird," Hannah murmured, snapping a photo. "We should keep going," Travis said, his voice tight. The deer watched us as we passed, its dark eyes following our every step. That night, the unease deepened. While sitting around the campfire, a stranger appeared on the trail. He was an older man wearing a tattered coat and carrying a walking stick. He stopped just at the edge of the firelight, his face shadowed. "Evening," he said, his voice raspy. "You folks camping out here?" Travis nodded. "Yeah, why?" The man smiled faintly. "Just be careful. Some places in these woods don't take kindly to visitors." Before any of us could respond, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the trees. Eli laughed nervously. "Well, that wasn't creepy at all." Travis brushed it off, but Hannah and I exchanged uneasy glances. Something about the man's words lingered in my mind. The third night was the worst. It started with voices, soft and indistinct, like someone whispering just out of earshot. I woke up in the RV, thinking it was one of the guys. But when I looked out the window, I saw a figure standing by the dying campfire. "Travis," I whispered, but he was asleep beside me. The figure turned its head toward the RV, and in the dim light I thought I saw Eli's face. But something was wrong. The way he moved, jerky and unnatural, made my skin crawl. I shook Travis awake. "There's someone out there." He groaned and got up, peering out the window. By then, the figure was gone. "You're imagining things," he said, climbing back into bed. But I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, Hannah showed us the photos she'd taken. One of them made my blood run cold. It was a shot of the clearing, but in the background, just beyond the trees, was a tall, distorted figure. Its limbs were too long, its head tilted at an impossible angle. "Did you see this when you took it?" I asked, my voice shaking. Hannah shook her head. "No, I swear it wasn't there." Travis dismissed it as a trick of the light, but I could see the fear in his eyes. Eli, of course, made a joke about Bigfoot, but even he seemed unsettled. By the time night fell, we were all on edge. The forest felt alive, pressing in on us with an almost tangible weight. The whispers returned, louder this time. And they weren't just random sounds, they were calling our names. "Jennifer," a voice hissed, soft and familiar. I froze, gripping the edge of my seat. "Did you hear that?" Eli nodded, his face pale. It said my name too. Travis grabbed the hatchet we'd been using to chop firewood. "Stay here," he ordered, stepping outside. "Don't," I begged, but he didn't listen. Seconds stretched into minutes. Then we heard it, a blood-curdling scream that echoed through the trees. Travis didn't come back. We locked the RV and huddled together, waiting for dawn. The thing outside clawed at the windows, whispering in Travis's voice, begging us to let it in. It wasn't until the first light of morning that the noises stopped. Hannah and I wanted to leave immediately, but the RV wouldn't start. Eli went outside to check the engine and didn't come back. When we finally worked up the courage to look for him, all we found was his jacket, shredded and stained with blood. Hannah and I fled on foot, following the trail back to the main road. We didn't stop until we reached a ranger station hours later. When we tried to explain what had happened, the ranger just shook his head. "People go missing out there all the time," he said. "Best to stay away." As we drove home, I spotted a figure standing by the roadside. It looked like Eli, but his face was blank, expressionless. He raised a hand in a slow wave as we passed. I haven't been back to the woods since. I don't think I ever will. Some places aren't meant for people. Some places belong to something else entirely. My name is Susan Wood, but everyone calls me Sousa. I'm 35 years old, and last fall I made the worst mistake of my life. I thought I was just going on another camping trip. I thought I needed peace, time to think, and space to heal after my divorce. But what I found in the Hercules Glades wilderness wasn't peace. It was something else entirely, something I still can't explain. This happened in October. The air was crisp, the leaves were fiery shades of red and orange, and the world felt quiet, as though it were holding its breath. I packed up my RV, a trusty old Ford I'd refurbished myself, and headed to a remote spot deep in the forest. I'd heard about the area from some travel blog. It mentioned breathtaking glades and a challenging hike to a place called Devil's Hollow. Perfect for someone who wanted to be alone, or so I thought. The drive was beautiful but isolating. The farther I got from civilization, the narrower the roads became. I didn't pass another car for miles. When I finally reached the ranger station at the edge of the wilderness, I was greeted by an older woman with sharp, watchful eyes. Her name tag read, Maggie. "You're going all the way out to Devil's Hollow?" she asked, her voice tinged with concern. I shrugged. That's the plan. Heard it's beautiful. It's cursed, she said flatly. Bad things happen there. I laughed nervously, unsure if she was joking. She wasn't. Her expression didn't change. "If you must go, stay out of the glade after sundown," Maggie warned. "The forest takes what it's owed." I brushed off her words as local folklore and left, eager to set up camp before dark. I parked the RV in a clearing not far from the main trail. The spot was perfect, quiet, secluded, and surrounded by towering trees that swayed gently in the breeze. I spent the evening setting up camp, cooking over a small fire and trying to convince myself I'd made the right decision coming out here. The first sign of trouble came as I was falling asleep. I heard it faintly at first, a soft rustling outside the RV. Probably an animal, I thought, but then came the whispering. It wasn't words exactly, just faint, indistinct murmurs that seemed to circle the RV. I sat up, my heart pounding. The sound stopped as soon as I turned on the lights. "It's nothing," I whispered to myself. "Just your imagination." The next morning, I decided to hike to Devil's Hollow. It wasn't an official trail, which made it harder to navigate. My compass acted strangely, spinning lazily as if it couldn't find north. I chalked it up to a malfunction and kept going, using the sun to guide me. About halfway there, I ran into a man carrying a hunting rifle. He was tall and weathered, with a face that looked like it had seen more than it cared to. "You shouldn't be here," he said, blocking my path. "It's a public park," I replied, trying to sound confident. He shook his head. "Not this part. The glade isn't safe." "Why?" I asked, more annoyed than scared. His eyes narrowed. "You won't believe me if I tell you. Just don't stay out here after dark." Before I could respond, he turned and disappeared into the trees. When I finally reached Devil's Hollow, I understood why people talked about it the way they did. The place didn't feel right. It was too quiet. No birds, no insects. Just an oppressive, eerie silence. The glade was a wide, open space surrounded by gnarled trees. In the center was a patch of scorched earth, as though a fire had burned there long ago. I took a few pictures, but my unease grew with every passing minute. Something about the air felt heavy, like it was pressing down on my chest. I noticed strange symbols carved into the trees, circles, triangles, and spirals I couldn't decipher. By the time I made it back to camp, the sun was dipping below the horizon. That night the whispers returned. They were louder this time, circling the RV like a predator stalking its prey. Then came the footsteps, soft, deliberate, and far too human for comfort. I locked the doors and peered through the window, clutching my flashlight like a lifeline. The beam caught a shadowy figure standing just at the edge of the clearing. It didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there watching. "Who's there?" I shouted, trying to sound brave. The figure tilted its head unnaturally, and my blood turned to ice. The next morning, I found footprints around the RV, barefoot prints, too large to be human. My supplies were disturbed, and one of my chairs was gone. I decided I couldn't stay another night. But when I tried to start the RV, the battery was dead. No lights, no engine, nothing. Panic began to set in. That afternoon, I ventured back to the glade, hoping to find cell service or someone who could help. Instead, I found more signs of the supernatural, items scattered around the glade, a rusted pocket watch, a child's shoe, a shattered compass. None of them looked recent. Then I heard it, a voice calling my name, Sousa. It was faint but unmistakable. My blood ran cold. The voice wasn't coming from a person, it was coming from the trees. By nightfall, the spirits grew bolder. The RV shook violently as something clawed at the walls. The whispers turned into screams, familiar voices, voices from my past. My ex-husband's voice rang out, cruel and mocking, echoing words he'd once said to me in anger. "You're nothing without me." I covered my ears, rocking back and forth, but the voices wouldn't stop. When the door to the RV slammed open, I grabbed a piece of firewood and ran. The forest seemed to shift as I fled, paths twisting and looping back on themselves. The shadows followed me, their forms shifting and writhing like smoke. I stumbled into the glade, clutching the firewood like a weapon. In the center of the scorched earth was a book, a diary, its pages filled with frantic, illegible writing. Desperate, I tore out a page and lit it with my lighter. The moment the page burned, the shadows recoiled, screaming in a deafening chorus. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I ran until my legs gave out, collapsing on the road just as a pair of headlights appeared in the distance. A ranger found me and took me to the station. I tried to explain, but my story sounded insane, even to me. Maggie was there, her expression unreadable. "You burned the book, didn't you?" she asked softly. I nodded, too shaken to speak. She sighed. "It won't be the last time someone stumbles into Devil's Hollow. The forest always takes what it's owed." As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Standing at the edge of the forest was the same shadowy figure, its head tilted, watching me leave. I don't camp anymore. Some places aren't meant for people. Some places belong to something else entirely. My name is Bobby Smith. I'm 41 years old, and for most of my life, I thought I was tough enough to face anything. As a firefighter, I'd run into burning buildings without hesitation, confident I could control the chaos. That was before the accident, before a collapsing beam trapped me, forcing me to watch a child die in the flames. I walked away physically unscathed, but the guilt stayed with me. Now I live off-grid in my RV, drifting from one remote spot to another, trying to outrun memories that won't let me sleep. That's how I ended up at Seneca Rocks in West Virginia, chasing a rumor about a place called Devil's Hollow. A bartender at a rundown pub had mentioned it after a few beers, describing it as the kind of place that eats your soul. It sounded melodramatic, but the idea hooked me. Maybe the isolation would help. Maybe confronting something darker than my own mind would finally give me peace. I drove into the woods early on a foggy morning, the narrow road twisting like a serpent through dense trees. My RV bounced over potholes, the forest pressing closer with every mile. The air was heavy, damp with the scent of moss and decaying leaves. It felt like the kind of place the world forgot. Eventually, the road dead-ended in a clearing. I parked, stepped outside, and stretched, scanning the area. A rough trail led deeper into the woods, marked by a weathered sign that read, "Devil's Hollow. Keep out." Perfect. The kind of ominous warning I'd come to expect from overblown local legends. I grabbed my backpack, packed with a flashlight, a knife, and some snacks, and set off down the trail. The forest grew denser with every step. The trees gnarled and twisted as if trying to block my way. The wind didn't reach this far in. It was silent, except for the crunch of my boots on the leaf-strewn path. By mid-afternoon, I reached an old campsite. A fire pit, long cold, sat surrounded by rusted cans and scraps of cloth. A torn hiking boot lay in the dirt, its laces frayed. Nearby, I found a tattered map folded against a rock. I picked it up. Furiously scrawled in the margin were 3 words, "Don't follow them." I frowned, glancing around. "Follow who?" I muttered, shoving the map into my pocket. I moved on, trying to shake the unease crawling up my spine. The deeper I went, the more the forest seemed to change. The trees leaned closer, their bark cracked and blackened. Strange carvings appeared, faces twisted in agony, their mouths open as if screaming. By the time I set up camp, the sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the woods shrouded in twilight. I built a small fire and sat beside it, staring into the flames. That's when I heard it, the faint sound of crying. A woman's voice, soft and broken, coming from the trees. I froze, my hand instinctively reaching for the knife at my belt. "Hello?" I called, my voice rough in the still air. The crying stopped. I stood, shining my flashlight toward the sound. The beam sliced through the darkness, illuminating nothing but endless trees. "Anyone out there?" I called again, louder this time. Nothing, just the crackle of the fire and my own breathing. I told myself it was probably an animal, some nocturnal bird or a trick of the wind. Still, I kept the knife close as I lay down for the night. I woke sometime after midnight to the sound of footsteps outside my tent, slow, deliberate. My pulse quickened as I grabbed my flashlight and knife, crawling out of the tent as quietly as I could. The fire had burned low, casting weak, flickering light over the campsite. That's when I saw her. A young woman stood at the edge of the clearing, barefoot and dirty, her long hair tangled with leaves. She looked at me with wide, fearful eyes. "Please," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "don't go deeper." "Who are you?" I asked, my throat dry. "What are you doing out here?" She didn't answer. Instead, she turned and disappeared into the trees, her figure swallowed by the darkness. I hesitated, every instinct telling me not to follow. But something about her felt off, like she didn't belong here any more than I did. The next morning, I couldn't stop thinking about her. Against my better judgment, I packed up camp and followed her trail. The carvings on the trees grew more frequent and grotesque, the air heavier with each step. I felt like I was walking into a trap, but I couldn't turn back. Not yet. That's when I found it. A natural rock arch rising out of the forest floor, its surface covered in ancient-looking symbols. Beneath it lay a shallow pit filled with ash and bones, human bones. I stumbled back, bile rising in my throat. The ground felt wrong here, the air thick with something I couldn't name. As I stood there, the shadows seemed to shift, coalescing into a figure. It was massive, its body cloaked in darkness, its eyes burning red. The apparition didn't move, but I could feel its gaze, heavy and searing, as if it were peeling back my skin to look inside me. "You don't belong here," it said, its voice deep and rumbling like distant thunder. I ran. The forest closed in around me, the trees twisting into impossible shapes. The path I'd followed was gone, replaced by jagged rocks and thick underbrush. The creature's voice followed me, low and mocking, whispering my failures, my guilt, my pain. "You let her die," it hissed, the words striking like a whip. "You watched her burn." I tripped, falling hard onto the ground. When I looked up, the woman was there again, different now. Her face was pale and streaked with tears, her eyes hollow. "Help me," she begged, reaching out a hand. I hesitated. The creature's voice filled my head again. "You can't save her. You couldn't save anyone." I gritted my teeth, forcing myself to stand. "You're not real," I said, my voice shaking. "You're just in my head." The apparition laughed, a terrible sound that echoed through the hollow. "Everything here is real, Bobby, including your sins." I turned and ran again, ignoring the whispers, the shadows, the faces that seemed to form in the trees. When I finally stumbled back to my RV, I was bleeding and covered in scratches, but alive. The air felt lighter as I slammed the door shut and locked it. I drove out of those woods without looking back. Whatever had been in the hollow, ghost, demon, or something worse, it hadn't killed me, but it had left its mark. I still hear its voice sometimes in the quiet hours of the night, reminding me of what I've lost. I'll never go back to Devil's Hollow. And if you're smart, neither will you. My name is Mason Davis, and back in 1998, I decided to take a long-awaited solo camping trip in the Adirondacks in upstate New York. I had been working as a mechanic for more years than I cared to count, and I figured I had earned a week or so out in nature, away from clients who never seemed to appreciate the difference between a flat tire and a blown transmission. I set out in my old RV, not one of those shiny new ones you see advertised. This thing had quirks, but it ran. Besides, I liked the old girl. She'd kept me on the road long enough that I trusted her. The campsite fight was isolated enough to give me the peace I was craving. It sat near an old, unused fire tower on the edge of a lake, one of those lakes where fog settled low and gave everything an eerie look in the early morning. Not that I minded. I was all set to sit by the lake, maybe fish a little and crack open a few beers. I thought I'd get some good rest too, but it was that first night that things got weird. I hadn't been asleep for long when I heard something outside, a rustling, like someone or something rummaging around. I figured it was an animal, maybe a raccoon, but when I went to check, there was no sign of anything. Just silence, and that fog now hanging thick around the trees like a heavy cloak. I shrugged it off and went back to bed, but I was uneasy. It felt like the night itself was watching me. The second night, I decided to keep my flashlight and a heavy wrench beside my bed, just in case. I wasn't about to let some woodland critter spoil my sleep twice in a row. This time, when the rustling started, it sounded closer, like it was right by the RV door. I waited, hoping it would go away, but it didn't. Mustering up the nerve, I cracked open the door quietly and shined the flashlight into the dark. There, just outside the RV, stood a man, tall, ragged-looking, and not exactly giving off friendly vibes. His clothes were grimy and torn, like he'd been living out there for weeks, and he was holding what looked like an old hunting knife, the blade chipped and worn. He noticed the light, locked eyes with me, and grinned, an expression that made me instantly regret opening the door. I yelled out, asking what he thought he was doing here, but he didn't answer. He just kept grinning, a twisted amusement dancing on his face. I thought about grabbing the wrench, but before I could, he darted into the trees, vanishing like some kind of ghost. I spent the rest of the night locked in the RV, every sound amplified, every creak making my heart race. Morning came, and I tried to convince myself it was a hallucination, maybe too many beers or a bad dream. I nearly packed up right then, but stubbornness got the better of me. I had come here to relax, and I wasn't going to let some crazy man ruin it. Besides, there was no one else around to report it to, and I didn't exactly feel like driving into town looking paranoid. The next night, though, made me wish I'd left. I had just settled in with a book when I heard the sound of metal scraping against the RV. My first thought was, not again. But this time it was different. It wasn't a curious raccoon or even the silent man from before. This was something deliberate, slow, menacing, like whoever was out there wanted me to hear them. I jumped up, wrench in hand, and opened the door a crack. The man was back, but this time he wasn't alone. Two others stood with him, both looking just as filthy and just as eager to be there. One was shorter and stocky with a crazed look in his eye, while the other seemed older, wiry, with a scar running across his face. They were holding tools, a hammer, a crowbar, and that chipped hunting knife. They watched me for a moment. Then the one with the scar started laughing, a slow, raspy sound that chilled me to the bone. He didn't say anything, just laughed, as if my horror was exactly what they'd come for. Then they moved forward, surrounding the RV like a pack of wolves. I slammed the door shut, locking it, though I knew that wouldn't do much against a hammer and crowbar. My mind raced. There was no way out without facing them, and even if I could reach the driver's seat, starting the RV wasn't a quick process. My only option was to hide and hope they'd give up. The scraping grew louder, mixed with bangs and occasional laughter. They were taunting me, letting me know they weren't in a hurry. I held my breath, feeling like prey waiting for the inevitable. Then I heard glass shatter. One of them had broken a side window, and I knew they'd be inside any second. I braced myself, heart pounding, as I heard footsteps inside the RV. One of them called out mockingly, saying he just wanted to chat, his voice dripping with malice. I couldn't stay hidden. I had to do something. Creeping out from my spot, wrench in hand, I caught sight of the scarred man near the front of the RV. I swung, hitting him hard across the shoulder. He staggered back, more surprised than hurt, but it gave me a split second to bolt for the door. The stocky one lunged at me, swinging his hammer and grazing my arm, but I kept moving, scrambling out of the RV and into the trees. I could hear them behind me, laughing and taunting, making a game out of it. I had no choice but to run, heart pounding, branches slapping against my face as I pushed deeper into the woods. I lost track of time, my only goal to put as much distance as possible between them and me. Finally, I stumbled onto an old trail, barely visible in the moonlight, and followed it, hoping it led somewhere, anywhere but here. After what felt like an eternity, I spotted a dim light in the distance, an old ranger station, abandoned but still standing. I rushed inside, barricading the door with whatever I could find. I didn't think it would stop them for long, but it was better than nothing. My breathing slowed, and I tried to gather my thoughts, but the quiet was short-lived. I heard footsteps outside, crunching leaves, followed by that same mocking laugh. They had followed me, and they were close. I searched the station, looking for anything to defend myself. Then I found an old flare gun. It wasn't much, but it was something. I loaded it, took a deep breath, and waited, listening to them get closer, the taunts growing louder. They were savoring every moment. The door creaked as one of them pushed against it, testing its strength. I aimed the flare gun, hands shaking, praying it would hold them off. The door burst open and I fired. The flare shot out, hitting the scarred man in the chest. He screamed, stumbling back as flames caught his clothes. The others backed off, momentarily stunned, giving me a chance to make a run for it again. I bolted out, not looking back as his screams echoed through the trees. I didn't stop running until I reached the main road, where a passing truck finally picked me up. I was bruised, bloodied, but alive. Later, I learned from authorities that they were part of a group of deranged vagrants rumored to haunt the forest edges, targeting lone campers. They'd been seen around, but had always managed to slip away, leaving nothing but fear, and sometimes worse, in their wake. The ranger station held more than just the memory of my terror. Investigators found remains in the woods nearby, bones half buried, and tents slashed to ribbons. Their leader, the scarred man I'd struck with the flare gun, had a record a mile long. A history of violence, assault, and a fixation on causing fear. He'd once been a guide, someone who knew these woods better than anyone, but after an accident years back he changed. Whatever kindness or sanity he'd had was long gone, leaving only a hunger for the thrill of terrorizing others. The authorities told me they'd continue looking, though I didn't stick around to find out if they'd catch the rest of them. My name is Juan Smith, and I'm 42 years old. This happened just last October, though sometimes it feels like a dream. A fevered, impossible nightmare, but I know it wasn't. The evidence is still on my hard drive, and the memories refuse to fade. I was on a solo trip to Wilson's Creek National Battlefield near Republic, Missouri. As an amateur documentarian and history enthusiast, I had been traveling in my RV for months, recording footage for a series about haunted Civil War sites. Wilson's Creek was next on my list, known for its brutal battle in 1861 and the ghost stories that lingered. People claimed to hear phantom cannon fire, see soldiers in the fog, and even witness the Ray House transform into the bustling field hospital it once was. I didn't believe in ghosts, but the stories intrigued me. Besides, documenting them made for good content. That's all this was supposed to be. A project, something to keep my mind busy after my wife Claire passed away. I pulled into the parking lot of the Wilson's Creek Visitor Center mid-afternoon. The sun hung low, casting long shadows over the fields. The park was quiet, eerily so. For a place of such historical significance, I'd expected other visitors, but I seemed to have the battlefield to myself. Inside the visitor center, I met Betty, a sprightly older woman who offered to guide me through the park. Her knowledge was impressive, rattling off battle strategies and casualty numbers like they were yesterday's news. But when I asked her about the hauntings, her tone shifted. "People see things," she said cryptically. "Hear things, especially at night." "What kind of things?" I pressed, angling my phone's voice recorder closer. Betty pursed her lips. "Soldiers, mostly. Lost souls. Some say the battlefield replays itself like a broken record. I'd stay away after dark if I were you." I smiled politely but dismissed her warning. Ghosts weren't real. history was. That evening I parked my RV in a designated camping area not far from the Ray house. The house was a stark white structure, quiet and unassuming in the fading light. It was hard to imagine it had once been a bloody field hospital. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the park transformed. The peaceful stillness of the day gave way to something heavier, like the air itself was holding its breath. I set up my equipment, tripods, cameras, audio recorders, near the Ray house. Around midnight, I reviewed the first round of footage in the RV. My heart skipped a beat when I heard faint, muffled cries on the audio track. They sounded like men shouting orders, followed by a sharp crack that could have been a musket. But when I checked the video, the field was empty. No movement, no source. The next morning I met Ethan, a park ranger, as I hiked back towards the Ray house. He was young, but carried himself like someone who'd seen more than he let on. "You're the guy camping out here, huh?" he asked, adjusting his hat. "Yeah, working on a documentary," I replied, pointing to my camera gear. Ethan hesitated, then said, "Be careful out there. You might not believe the stories, but this place has a way of getting to people." "What do you mean?" He shrugged. "Some folks see things they can't explain. A couple of tourists last year left in the middle of the night, said they heard someone walking around their tent, but no one was there." I nodded, though I didn't take him seriously. Ghost stories were great for tourism, but I needed hard evidence. That afternoon, I ventured deeper into the battlefield. The field stretched out endlessly, dotted with weathered cannons and plaques marking key moments in the battle. I took some stunning shots of the landscape, but my focus was on the Ray house. As I approached, I noticed something strange. Bits of old fabric and rusted tools scattered near the house. They looked like bandages and surgical instruments. But how could they still be here after more than a century? I reached for my camera, but a faint groan stopped me cold. It sounded human, but when I spun around, the field was empty. That night, the battlefield came alive. I was filming the moonlit fields when I saw it, a flickering light in the distance. It looked like a campfire, but it hadn't been there during the day. As I walked toward it, the air grew colder. My breath misted in front of me, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. Then I saw them. Shadowy figures moved through the fog. At first they were faint outlines, but as I got closer, they sharpened into the forms of soldiers. Some marched in formation, rifles in hand. Others slumped over, clutching wounds. Their faces were pale and blurred like watercolors bleeding into paper. I froze, my camera dangling uselessly from my neck. They didn't notice me, or if they did, they didn't care. They were trapped in their own endless battle, repeating the same moments over and over. I stumbled back to the RV, but the activity didn't stop. As I fumbled with the door, a deafening blast echoed through the night. It was unmistakably cannon fire. Inside, the RV felt like a cage. The walls shook and the lights flickered. I heard voices outside, men shouting orders, horses neighing, the clash of metal on metal. But when I peered through the window, the battlefield was empty. The sounds grew louder, unbearable. Then came the knocking. A single deliberate knock on the RV door. I didn't answer. Another knock. Then another, more insistent. Finally, I swung the door open, flashlight in hand. No one was there. But as the beam swept across the ground, I saw fresh footprints in the mud, boot prints leading away from the RV and disappearing into the field. I couldn't stay another night. I packed up my equipment and tried to start the RV, but the engine sputtered and died. I cursed and grabbed my phone, only to find it wouldn't turn on. Every piece of technology I had was failing. Desperate, I started walking toward the visitor center. The battlefield was pitch black, and the fog seemed thicker than before. As I stumbled through the fields, I heard it again. My name whispered from somewhere in the fog. Juan. I didn't look back. By the time I reached the visitor center, the sun was rising. Betty was there, opening up for the day. I tried to explain what had happened, but she just smiled sadly. "You've seen them, haven't you?" she asked. I nodded, too shaken to speak. Betty leaned closer. "They're not done fighting. They never will be." I left Wilson's Creek that morning, swearing never to return. But the footage I captured tells a different story. In every frame, just behind me, is a shadowy figure, a soldier, watching, waiting. Some battles never end. My name is Doug Hargrave, and back in 2019, I took my old RV out to the quiet forested edges of North Cascades National Park in Washington State. It was my first real solo camping trip, and I'd been waiting for something like this, a solid getaway from my usual routine back in Seattle. I wasn't exactly the outdoors type, but I figured, why not? I'd bought this RV on a whim the year before, a retirement gift to myself, though retired might have been stretching it. Let's just say my company wasn't thrilled when I walked out that morning. The mist hung low over the ground, and the air was as crisp as it gets. It felt good to breathe that air without the usual city grime. I settled into my folding chair with a paperback, expecting nothing more from the day than some peace. My plan was simple. Sit around, maybe fish a little, grill up whatever was in the freezer, then call it a night. Easy, right? I hadn't noticed anyone else on my stretch of road. That was one of the things I liked about the park. Vast, quiet, and empty. No tourists, no loud music, and most importantly, no nosy neighbours. I'd parked in a remote area with views of towering Douglas firs and thick ferns carpeting the ground, somewhere off Route 20 where most folks don't bother going. I'd barely been there half a day when I heard a distant crunch of footsteps. Looking up, I spotted a man in the distance, cutting through the trees like he owned the place. He was tall, lean but wiry, with a face that looked as though it had taken a few hits over the years. His dark, greasy hair was shoved under a beat-up baseball cap, and his clothes looked worn, like they'd seen more forest nights than washing machines. He caught my eye, and for a second I thought he was going to keep walking. But instead, he stopped, gave me a look that lingered just a little too long, then veered off toward my RV. I put down my book and stood up, trying to look casual but still assertive, like maybe he'd get the hint that this was private space. Not that I had any ownership over the forest, but it's natural to feel territorial when you're alone in the woods. "Nice setup you got here," he said in a voice that was rough and gravelly, almost like he hadn't spoken in a while. Didn't expect anyone out this far. I shrugged, keeping my tone light. Just me. Figured I'd get some quiet out here. He didn't respond right away, just let his eyes drift over my RV, my cooler, the small stack of firewood I'd gathered. Then he nodded. "You mind if I sit?" I did mind, actually, but I didn't want to come off as rude, so I forced a nod. He plopped down on the edge of the picnic table, eyes still scanning my stuff. "You been out here long?" he asked. "Just got here this morning," I replied, not offering much. "Ah," he said, scratching at his neck. "I've been out here a while myself, been walking a lot. Pretty remote place for a hike," I noted, trying to gauge his intentions. His clothes had stains that weren't exactly mud, and his fingernails were caked with something darker. I was already regretting letting him sit. "You ever hear the stories about this place?" he asked, his voice low. "People go missing in these woods." That line would have felt more ominous if it hadn't sounded like the setup for a ghost story. I smirked, leaning back. "Well, I haven't seen any ghosts yet." His expression didn't change. "Not ghosts," he replied slowly. "People." A pause settled over us, thick and awkward. I'd had enough weird encounters back in the city, but something about his presence, the way his eyes bored into mine with a strange intensity, made me uneasy. I cleared my throat, glancing around. "Well, I think I'll head back to my chair. Got some reading to catch up on." "Sure," he said, not moving. "Just be careful, yeah?" With that, he wandered off, not saying another word. I watched him go until he disappeared into the trees and let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Something about him was off, but I tried to brush it off as paranoia. I wasn't used to being alone in the woods, after all. Maybe I was just reading too much into things. But as the day wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every little noise, a branch snapping, leaves rustling, made me sit up and look around. I saw nothing, though, and after a few hours, I managed to convince myself it was all in my head. That night, I set up a small fire by the RV and tried to relax. But as darkness settled in, that uneasy feeling grew stronger. It was the kind of silence that presses in on you, amplifying every little sound. I could hear my own breathing, the crackling of the fire, the occasional hoot of an owl. But somewhere in the distance, I thought I heard footsteps, slow, steady, and unmistakably human. I froze, straining my ears to listen, but the footsteps stopped just as suddenly as they'd started. I waited, muscles tense, eyes scanning the tree line, but I saw nothing. It was probably an animal, I told myself, though I didn't entirely believe it. After a while, I went back into the RV, locking the door behind me. I'd left a window cracked for some air, and as I settled into bed, I tried to put it out of my mind. I was dozing off when I heard it again, a faint rustling followed by a low creak that sounded like footsteps outside. Heart-pounding, I sat up and grabbed my flashlight, flicking it on. I scanned the inside of the RV, then peered out the window. Nothing, just darkness and the quiet shapes of trees swaying in the breeze. I started to turn away when something moved just at the edge of the light. The man from earlier stood there, his face blank, his eyes fixed on the RV. He didn't move, just stood there, staring. It wasn't until I saw the glint of something in his hand that I realized he was holding a knife. I dropped the flashlight, my breath hitching. I was trapped in here, miles from anyone who could help. Grabbing my cell phone, I frantically dialed, only to see no service, flashing on the screen. Typical. The next few minutes were a blur. I grabbed a metal pipe I'd brought for setting up the awning and inched toward the door. My mind raced through options, each one more useless than the last. He was still outside, pacing now, like he was trying to work himself up to something. I needed a distraction. In a split-second decision, I cracked open the window just enough to toss out an empty beer can I'd left by the sink. It hit the ground with a soft clank, and his head whipped toward the noise. Seizing the moment, I flung open the RV door, lunged out, and swung the pipe as hard as I could. The metal hit his shoulder, and he stumbled back, dropping the knife. I didn't wait to see if he'd get back up. I took off running, my legs burning as I bolted through the trees. Adrenaline was the only thing keeping me going, but I could still hear him behind me, stumbling through the brush, cursing under his breath. I kept running, every instinct telling me not to look back, not to stop. I don't know how long I ran, but eventually the sounds of pursuit faded. I collapsed against a tree, gasping for air, my heart hammering. I was alone, bruised and shaken, but alive. In the days that followed, I learned that authorities had found traces of what the man had done, shallow graves scattered around the woods, with remains too far gone to identify. They said he'd been hiding out in the park for years, living off the grid, hunting the occasional unsuspecting camper. But when I think back to that night, the thing that haunts me isn't the chase or even the terror I felt. It's the thought of how close I'd come to being just another name on a missing persons list, another story lost in the depths of the forest. My name is Bradley Erickson, and I'm 42 years old. This happened just a few months ago in Quare River State Park, Missouri. I'd taken my RV out for a long weekend, hoping to find some peace and clarity after losing my wife Emily in a car accident last year. The grief was unbearable, and I thought maybe some solitude in the woods would help me reconnect with myself. I couldn't have been more wrong. The trip started normally enough. I parked my RV in a quiet, secluded spot near the river. It was late afternoon, and the golden sunlight filtered through the trees, making the forest look almost magical. I didn't see any other campers around, but that suited me just fine. I wasn't in the mood for small talk or friendly neighbors. This trip was about healing, or at least trying to. After setting up camp, I took a short hike to stretch my legs and get familiar with the area. The trails were beautiful, winding through dense woods that smelled of pine and damp earth. About a mile in, I stumbled across an old swing set tucked into a clearing. It was rusted and overgrown with weeds, like something out of a forgotten childhood. The sight of it sent a chill down my spine, though I couldn't say why. I turned back before the sun started to set, eager to get back to the safety of my RV. That night, I built a small fire and cooked dinner. The quiet was almost oppressive, broken only by the occasional hoot of an owl or the rustling of leaves. I tried to focus on the crackle of the fire, but something felt off. The air was too still, like the forest was holding its breath. Around midnight, I crawled into bed. That's when I heard it, laughter. Soft, high-pitched giggles, faint but distinct. At first I thought I was imagining it, but then it came again, drifting through the trees. Kids, I muttered to myself. It didn't make sense. There were no families around, at least not that I'd seen. The laughter continued for a few minutes, then stopped as suddenly as it had started. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me and forced myself to sleep. The next day, I decided to hike one of the longer trails. The air was crisp, the kind of autumn morning that usually lifted my spirits, but the woods felt different now, as if they were watching me. About 2 miles in, I stumbled across the swing set again. I hadn't realized I'd looped back to the clearing. This time, one of the swings was moving, creaking softly as it swayed back and forth. There was no wind. I froze, my heart pounding. For a moment I considered walking up to the swings to see if someone was there, but an overwhelming sense of dread stopped me. Instead I turned and hurried back to the trail. That afternoon I met a park ranger named Chloe Hart. She was checking the area for maintenance issues and stopped by my campsite to say hello. "You here alone?" she asked, glancing at my RV. "Yeah," I said, "needed a little time to myself." She nodded but seemed uneasy. "This part of the park doesn't get many visitors anymore." "Why's that?" She hesitated, then said, "People say it's haunted. Mostly just stories about kids who drowned in the river years ago, but you know how stories have a way of sticking." I forced a laugh. "You're not trying to scare me off, are you?" "No," she said quickly, her expression serious. "Just be careful. If you hear anything strange, don't go looking for it." That night, the laughter returned. It started faint, almost playful, but grew louder and more insistent. This time, it didn't stop. I sat by the fire, gripping my flashlight as the sound echoed through the trees. Then I heard a voice, soft and childlike. "Bradley, come play with us." I stood, my blood running cold. "Who's there?" No answer. I scanned the woods with my flashlight, but the beam only illuminated empty branches. The laughter erupted again, this time from behind me. I spun around, but no one was there. When I finally retreated to the RV, I found handprints on the windows, small, childlike prints pressed against the glass. The next morning I debated leaving, but something kept me there. Maybe it was stubbornness, or maybe it was the feeling that running away wouldn't help me escape the weight in my chest. I spent the day trying to distract myself with chores, but the unease lingered. When I stepped outside to get some fresh air, I found a small wooden spinning top on the step of my RV. I hadn't seen it before, and I definitely hadn't put it there. That evening, I decided to confront whatever was happening. I grabbed my flashlight and headed to the swing set clearing, determined to find answers. The swings were moving again, creaking softly in the still air. As I stepped closer, I saw footprints in the dirt, small, bare footprints leading toward the river. The laughter returned, louder than ever, but now it sounded wrong, distorted, like a tape being played too fast and too slow at the same time. Then I saw them, shadowy figures of children, barely more than outlines, standing by the water's edge. They turned to look at me, their faces pale and featureless. One of them giggled, holding up the spinning top. "Come play with us," the child said, its voice hollow and echoing. I stumbled back, tripping over a root. The figures advanced, their laughter turning to screams. I scrambled to my feet and ran, the sound of their footsteps close behind me. When I reached the RV, I slammed the door shut and locked it, but the laughter didn't stop. It surrounded me, coming from every direction. Desperate, I grabbed the spinning top and hurled it into the fire. The flames roared brighter and hotter than before, and the laughter turned to agonized wails. The handprints on the windows faded, and the air grew still again. The next morning, I left without looking back. As I drove away, I saw Ranger Hart standing by the side of the road. She didn't wave, just watched me with a look of quiet understanding. Even now I hear the laughter sometimes, faint and distant, as if it's waiting for me to come back. But I won't. Not ever. My name is Mason Kennedy, and I'm 30 years old. This happened in late September during what I'd hoped would be a peaceful week of RV camping in Ha-Ha-Tonka State Park, Missouri. I had recently gone through a bitter divorce, and I needed space to think, breathe, and just be alone for a while. My plan was simple: park the RV, hike the trails, take some photos, and spend my evenings journaling by a campfire. Instead, I found something that still haunts me. I arrived on a crisp Friday morning, the sun spilling through the trees as I parked in a secluded spot near the ruins of Ha-Ha-Tonka Castle. The castle had fascinated me ever since I first heard about it, a grand mansion reduced to stone skeletons after a tragic fire in the early 1900s. People said it was haunted, but I didn't buy into ghost stories. As I stepped out of the RV, I breathed in the sharp scent of pine and damp earth. The air was still, almost unnaturally so, but I chalked it up to being deep in the woods. I unloaded my gear, grabbed my camera, and set off toward the ruins. The castle was more imposing than I'd imagined. Towering stone walls, arched windows, and crumbling turrets stood against the backdrop of the autumn sky. I spent the afternoon exploring, snapping photos of the overgrown ivy snaking up the walls and the jagged remains of what had once been a spiral staircase. Inside, the temperature dropped sharply. It was like stepping into a freezer. I found a room with a massive stone fireplace and stood there for a moment, marveling at the craftsmanship. That's when I caught a faint whiff of sulphur, sharp and acrid like burnt matches. I wrinkled my nose and turned to leave, but I froze when I heard it, a low whisper just behind me. "Mason." I whipped around, heart pounding. No one was there. By the time I returned to the RV, the sun was dipping below the horizon. I tried to push the eerie experience out of my mind as I set up a campfire and cooked a simple dinner, but the stillness of the forest pressed in on me, too quiet for my liking. I was just starting to relax when I heard faint rustling behind the RV. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it into the trees, but the beam illuminated nothing but branches. "Probably just a raccoon," I muttered, trying to convince myself. But later, as I lay in bed, I swore I heard footsteps circling the RV. The next day, I decided to hike one of the trails leading to the Devil's Hollow, a ravine shrouded in local legend. The name alone should have been enough of a warning, but I was curious. I'd come here to clear my head, and exploring the park felt like a distraction from my own problems. As I descended into the hollow, the forest seemed to close in around me. The air grew colder, and the light took on an odd greenish hue as it filtered through the dense canopy. I paused to take a photo of a gnarled tree, but when I lowered the camera, I saw something, or someone, standing in the distance. It looked like a man, but his posture was wrong, too stiff and upright. Before I could focus on him, he stepped behind a tree and vanished. "Hello?" I called, my voice trembling. No response. That night, I tried to brush it off as my imagination. I lit another fire and sat close to it, hoping the warmth would ease the chill in my bones, but the unease I felt was impossible to shake. I stared into the flames, letting my thoughts drift, when something across the fire caught my eye. A figure stood just beyond the circle of light, its silhouette faint but unmistakable. "Who's there?" I demanded, grabbing my flashlight. When I aimed the beam, the figure was gone. Then from behind me, I heard a voice. Mason. It sounded like my ex-husband, Scott, but that was impossible. He was hundreds of miles away. I spun around, but there was nothing there. The next morning, I decided to leave. I'd had enough. But when I tried to start the RV, the engine refused to turn over. I checked the water pump, hoping to at least fix the plumbing, but the tank was bone dry, even though I'd filled it before leaving home. Frustrated, I walked to the ranger station, about a mile away. The man on duty, Ranger Martin Holt, listened as I explained my situation, though I left out the strange occurrences. "You camping near the ruins?" he asked, his brow furrowing. "Yeah, why?" He hesitated before answering. "Strange things happen in that part of the park. Always have. My advice? Don't stick around after dark." I wanted to press him for details, but the look in his eyes stopped me. That afternoon, I decided to hike back to the castle ruins, partly out of frustration and partly out of defiance. If the place was as haunted as people said, I wanted to see it for myself. In the same room where I had smelled sulphur before, I noticed something I hadn't seen the first time. A small leather-bound journal wedged into a crack in the stone wall. Curious, I pulled it out and opened it. The pages were filled with cramped handwriting detailing the life of the mansion's original owner, a wealthy businessman named Robert Snyder. One entry caught my attention. "I made the pact. It will bring me wealth and power, but the price is steep. The Hollow will never rest." The words sent a chill down my spine. That night the entity made itself known. The whispers started just after sundown, faint at first but growing louder. Mason. Mason. I bolted the RV door and grabbed the journal, flipping through it in search of answers. Another entry described a ritual involving fire and salt to ward off the entity, but it was vague, more of a warning than an instruction. Suddenly the RV shook violently, as if something massive was pushing against it. I heard scraping noises, like claws raking across metal. My flashlight flickered and I saw it, a shadowy figure standing outside the window. Its eyes glowed red, and its face twisted into a grotesque grin. I screamed and grabbed the journal along with a box of matches and a pouch of salt I'd brought for cooking. I stumbled outside, heart racing, and made a circle of salt around the RV. The figure watched me, swaying slightly as if amused. "You can't have me," I whispered, clutching the journal like a shield. The figure stepped closer, its movements jerky and unnatural. It reached the edge of the salt circle and stopped, hissing like an animal. Desperate, I opened the journal to the page with the ritual entry. I tore it out and lit it on fire, holding the burning paper high. The figure let out a blood-curdling scream and dissolved into a cloud of black smoke, which dissipated into the night. The next morning the RV started without a problem. I packed up and left the park as fast as I could. I don't know what that thing was, demon, ghost, or some twisted remnant of Snyder's curse, but I know one thing. I'll never go back to Hahatonka. Even now, in the safety of my apartment, I sometimes catch the faint smell of sulphur in the air, and at night, when the world is quiet, I hear whispers calling my name. The trees at Wildcat Hollow were so dense they swallowed the daylight. I'd been in remote places before, but this felt different. Quieter, heavier, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. As I pulled my RV into the secluded campsite, I reminded myself this was just another job. 2 weeks in the woods tracking wildlife migration patterns, then back to the lab. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. At the ranger station earlier, Evan, the local ranger, had been unusually chatty. He was wiry with a weathered face and a nervous energy that made him seem out of place in the middle of nowhere. "You're staying near Wildcat Hollow?" he asked, his tone more serious than I expected. "Yes, perfect spot for my research," I replied, thinking he might offer useful advice about the trails. Instead, he leaned in. "Be careful out there. Folks around here talk about a witch." I laughed. "A witch? Yeah. She cursed the land a long time ago, or so they say. Crops withered, animals went mad, people got sick. They say she was hanged near the creek, but she didn't really die. Her spirit stayed behind." He hesitated. "Strange things happen around there." I smiled politely, but I didn't believe a word. My work required me to stay grounded in reality, and ghost stories didn't fit into that framework. Now, setting up my gear in the eerie quiet, I found myself replaying Evan's warning. The first night I barely slept. My dreams were vivid and disjointed, shadows moving through the trees, whispers too faint to understand. I woke up drenched in sweat, the feeling of being watched sharper than before. The next morning, I headed out with my gear to explore the trails. The forest felt alive, but not in the way I'd expected. It wasn't just the rustle of leaves or the scurrying of animals. It was the stillness between the sounds, the way the silence seemed to pulse. By the second day, I found something strange, a pattern of ash in a perfect circle on the ground. At first, I thought it might be the remnants of a campfire, but there were no signs of burning, just the ash neatly laid out. Nearby, I saw a deer standing unnaturally still, its dark eyes locked on me. When I took a step forward, it didn't bolt like it should have. Instead, it walked away slowly, as if it wanted me to follow. I shook my head. forcing myself to focus on my work. But that night, the dreams returned, stronger. This time, the shadowy figure was closer, watching me from just beyond the firelight. By the third day, I was exhausted. My radio wasn't working, and my phone couldn't get a signal. I told myself it was just the isolation getting to me. I'd spent plenty of time alone in the field before, but this felt different. The animals were acting strange, too. A raccoon approached my RV in broad daylight, staring at me with glassy eyes. It didn't flinch when I moved closer. I decided to explore further down the Hollow Creek Trail. About a mile in, I stumbled across an abandoned cabin. Its roof sagged, and moss covered the wooden walls, but it looked sturdy enough to have survived decades of weather. Inside, I found shelves filled with jars of dried herbs and something that made my skin crawl. Small carvings of twisted faces, each one staring up at me with hollow eyes. In the corner, an old book sat on a makeshift table. Its pages were yellowed and crumbling. The writing inside was in a language I didn't recognize, full of symbols that sent a chill through me. As I left the cabin, the air seemed heavier, like the forest was pressing down on me. That's when I smelled it, burnt herbs, faint but distinct. The scent grew stronger as I neared my campsite, and when I arrived the ash patterns were there again, this time circling the RV. That night, I woke to footsteps outside the RV. They were slow and deliberate, crunching through the leaves. My breath hitched as I grabbed my flashlight and shone it out the window. The beam illuminated only empty trees. Then the footsteps stopped, replaced by a faint tapping on the door. "Who's there?" I called, my voice trembling. No answer, just the tapping. I grabbed the book I'd taken from the cabin and threw it into my pack. Something told me it was connected to whatever was happening, and I needed answers. I bolted outside, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The ash circle was unbroken, and the forest was silent except for the sound of my own breathing. That's when I saw her. She stood at the edge of the woods, a gaunt figure with pale skin and hollow eyes. Her black dress fluttered as if caught in a breeze. I couldn't feel. "You've taken enough," she said, her voice a rasp. I froze. "What are you talking about?" "You disturb the balance," she said, stepping closer. Her feet didn't touch the ground. "You tag, you take, you leave your mark. Now the forest marks you." "I'm just doing research," I stammered, but the air grew colder, and the smell of burning herbs was overwhelming. "I'll stop, I'll leave," I whispered. "It's too late," she whispered. Her voice seemed to come from all around me. "Unless you're willing to make a trade." The witch vanished, and the forest came alive. Roots burst from the ground, snaking toward me. Animals surrounded me, their eyes glowing in the dark. I ran blindly, clutching the pack with the book. Somehow I found my way back to the cabin. Inside, the air was suffocating, and the symbols on the wall seemed to rise. The witch's voice echoed in my head. "Restore the balance." I opened the book, desperate for answers. One page stood out, its symbols burning into my vision. The ritual was clear: burn what I had taken, destroy the tools I'd used, and leave a piece of myself behind. My hands shook as I piled the tracking devices and the book into a heap. I lit a match, and flames consumed the pile, the fire crackling unnaturally loud. The witch appeared again, her hollow eyes watching. "One more thing," she said. "One what?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "A piece of yourself," she said, pointing at my arm. The firelight glinted off a knife on the table. I don't remember the pain, just the blood pooling on the floor as the cabin shuddered around me. When I awoke, it was dawn, and the forest was quiet. The ash circles were gone, the animals had scattered, and the air felt lighter. I packed my things and left Wildcat Hollow that morning, the bandage on my arm a constant reminder of what I'd given. But even now, months later, I sometimes smell burnt herbs in the air, and at night when I close my eyes, I see the witch standing in the forest, waiting, for what I don't know. My name is Billy Gonzalez, and I'm 35 years old. This happened just a few weeks ago, and honestly, I'm still trying to make sense of it. Clara and I had planned the trip for weeks, an anniversary getaway to the Mark Twain National Forest in southern Missouri. It was supposed to be a break from work, a chance to unplug and enjoy nature. I had no idea how much we'd regret going. We left St. Louis early on a Friday morning, towing our RV behind Clara's truck. The forest was stunning. Towering oaks, sycamores with golden leaves, and miles of peaceful trails. Clara, 31, is a history teacher and loves local folklore. She'd been going on and on about Native American legends, specifically something called a skinwalker. I read about them in this old journal, she said as we pulled into the campsite. They're supposedly evil witches that can take on the form of animals or even people. Creepy, right? I said, half listening as I focused on backing the RV into the spot. I wasn't into ghost stories or folklore, but Clara lived for it. The campsite was remote, no other campers in sight. The nearest ranger station was about 5 miles away. Clara loved the solitude, but something about it made me uneasy. It was too quiet, the kind of quiet where you hear every rustle, every snap of a twig. That first night, things started going wrong. The RV's power system, which had been working fine earlier, suddenly cut out. No lights, no heating. I fumbled with the battery, but it wouldn't hold a charge. I told Clara we'd fix it in the morning. We ate dinner by lantern light, and she kept talking about the legends of the area, how the Osage people once lived there, and how they'd abandoned parts of the forest after strange disappearances. After dinner, we sat outside by the fire, staring up at the stars. That's when we heard it, the faintest sound, like someone whistling a tune. "Did you hear that?" I asked. Clara nodded, leaning forward. "Yeah, maybe it's the wind." But there was no wind. The trees were still. The whistling came again, faint, distant, and then stopped. I tried to shake it off, but I felt something cold in the pit of my stomach. The next morning we decided to hike a nearby trail. Clara was excited, snapping pictures of the foliage and pointing out wildlife. I tried to relax, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The forest felt off. Around midday we stumbled across something strange deep in the woods. There was a clearing with a single dead tree. Its bark was stripped, and the ground around it was littered with bones, animal bones. "What the hell is this?" I muttered. Clara crouched to examine the bones. "It's probably a predator's kill site." She paused, frowning. "But some of these look old, like they've been here for years." I wanted to leave, but Clara kept poking around. "Look at this," she said, pointing to the tree. Carved into the bark were strange symbols, circles, triangles, and jagged lines. "These could be Native American markings, or some psycho's graffiti," I said. "Let's go." That night, the whistling returned. It was closer this time, and I swear I heard my name mixed into the tune. "Billy." "Clara," she whispered, clutching my arm. "Do you hear that?" Yeah, I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside, scanning the trees. The beam caught nothing but shadows. "Probably just some animal," I said, trying to convince myself. We climbed into bed, but neither of us slept much. Around 3 a.m., Clara shook me awake. "Billy, there's someone out there," she hissed. I listened, footsteps, slow and deliberate, circling the RV. I grabbed the flashlight and crept to the window. What I saw made my blood run cold. A figure stood just beyond the fire pit. It was tall, impossibly tall, with arms that hung down past its knees. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, and its eyes glowed like embers. I blinked, and it was gone. The next morning, I tried to convince Clara to leave. "The battery's dead, the forest is weird, and I just don't have a good feeling about this." "But Billy," she said, "what if we're overreacting? Maybe it's just an animal, or maybe it's not." I snapped, "Let's pack up." We spent the day trying to get the RV ready to leave, but everything went wrong. The engine wouldn't start, the tools I needed were missing. It was like something didn't want us to leave. That afternoon, Clara wandered off to collect firewood. When she came back, she was pale and shaking. "Billy," she whispered, "I saw something. It looked like you, but it wasn't you." That night was the worst. The whistling turned into whispers. They came from all sides, pressing in on us. "Billy," it mimicked our voices perfectly. At one point, I opened the RV door thinking Clara was outside, only to find her trembling behind me. "Don't go out there," she begged. The fire kept the thing at bay for a while, but around midnight it started circling closer. I saw it again, standing just beyond the firelight. It smiled, its mouth too wide, its teeth too sharp. "What do you want?" I yelled. It didn't answer. It just stared, swaying slightly, like it was waiting for something. We knew we couldn't stay. Around dawn, we doused the fire and grabbed our backpacks. I rigged a makeshift torch, hoping the flame would keep the thing away. We started hiking, heading for the nearest road. The thing followed us. I'd catch glimpses of it through the trees, its long limbs, its glowing eyes. It never attacked, but it never let us out of its sight. At one point, Clara tripped and fell. I helped her up, and when I turned back, the thing was standing on the trail, blocking our path. It opened its mouth, and a horrible guttural sound came out, a mix of a growl and a scream. I waved the torch at it, and it flinched, retreating into the shadows. We finally reached the road just as the sun was setting. A park ranger drove by and stopped when he saw us. "You two okay?" he asked, eyeing our disheveled appearance. "Something's out there," I said. "Something not human." The ranger's face darkened. "You were camping in the southern sector?" I nodded. He shook his head. "You're lucky to be alive. That's sacred ground. You should have left it alone." "What is it?" Clara asked. He didn't answer. He just told us to get in the truck. We never went back to the Mark Twain National Forest. We sold the RV and moved to an apartment in the city. But sometimes, late at night, I hear the whistling, faint, distant, but there. I don't think it's over. I thought I knew isolation. I'd spent years driving across the country, chasing celestial events, camping in places no one else dared to go. Black Rock Desert was supposed to be no different. I'd chosen this spot because it was one of the darkest places in the United States, far from the light pollution of cities, with nothing but the stars above and the cracked earth below. A perfect place to watch the meteor shower I'd been anticipating for months. But the desert has a way of getting under your skin. I arrived in the late afternoon, the sun blazing high, its rays bouncing off the endless white of the salt flats. The ground stretched out in every direction, flat and featureless, interrupted only by distant mountains rising like ghosts on the horizon. It was beautiful in a desolate way, the kind of place that makes you feel small and insignificant. Exactly what I needed. The RV's engine rumbled to a stop, kicking up dust as I parked. I opened the door, stepping into the dry, hot air. The silence was immediate. No wind, no rustling leaves, no distant hum of civilization, just a profound, almost oppressive stillness. I told myself it was peaceful, that this was what I wanted, a few days alone in the desert to focus on my photography and watch the night sky. But as I looked out over the vast expanse of cracked earth, a strange feeling settled in my chest, like a weight pressing down. I brushed it off. It had been a long drive and the heat was getting to me. I'd feel better once the sun went down. I spent the first few hours setting up camp, adjusting my telescope and testing my camera equipment. The sky was still a blazing blue, but the desert's unforgiving heat was beginning to fade, replaced by a sharp chill as the sun sank lower. By the time dusk arrived, the temperature had plummeted, and I retreated into the RV to grab a jacket before stepping back outside. That's when the radio first crackled to life. I'd brought my old ham radio along, hoping to catch some weather updates or maybe listen in on local astronomy broadcasts. I hadn't expected much out here, but the static-filled hum surprised me. I turned the dial, searching for a signal, and for a moment I thought I'd found one, a faint voice cutting through the static. "Don't stay." I froze. The words were barely audible, like a whisper carried on the wind, but they were unmistakable. I leaned closer, adjusting the frequency, but the voice was gone, replaced by the familiar hiss of static. I turned the radio off, chalking it up to interference, old equipment, or weird atmosphere. Still, the unease in my chest was growing. The first night was incredible. The sky came alive with meteors streaking across the blackness, more stars than I'd ever seen in my life. I stood in awe, snapping pictures, adjusting my telescope, completely losing track of time. Out here, under the stars, the rest of the world felt far away. It was just me, the night, and the vastness of space. And yet, something nagged at me. When I reviewed the photos later, I noticed something strange in the background of one of my long exposure shots. There was a blur, a faint, almost imperceptible smudge, At first I thought it was a mistake. Dust on the lens, maybe, or a glitch in the camera's settings. But as I scrolled through the rest of the images, the blur appeared again and again in each photo. It seemed to be getting closer to the RV. I wiped the camera lens, took another shot, and stared hard at the screen. Nothing. It had to be some kind of artifact from the desert air, the heat mixing with the cold night, playing tricks on the lens. Still, the feeling in my chest tightened. I turned in early, trying to push the unease aside, telling myself I'd check the equipment in the morning. Day 2 was different. I woke to a stifling heat that even the RV's air conditioning couldn't seem to fight. I cursed, fiddling with the controls, but the air blowing through the vents was weak and warm. I grabbed a bottle of water and stepped outside, hoping the breeze would provide some relief, but the air was dead still as the grave. I spent most of the day trying to fix the RV's engine, which had been acting sluggish since I arrived. I knew I should be enjoying the desert, but the more time I spent out there, the more the silence started to gnaw at me. It wasn't the peaceful isolation I had expected. It felt watchful. As the day dragged on, the sun beat down, turning the ground beneath my feet into a furnace. The radio, which had been quiet since last night's strange transmission, crackled to life again. This time, the voice was clearer. Danger. You need to leave. I dropped the wrench I was holding, staring at the radio in disbelief. The voice was faint, distorted, like it was coming from miles away. But it was unmistakable. Someone or something was speaking to me. I snatched up the radio, twisting the dial, trying to find the source. Static. Nothing but static. The voice was gone again, leaving me standing in the middle of the desert, sweat running down my back, my heart hammering in my chest. I should have left then. I should have packed up and driven out of there, but the RV's engine was still stalling, and part of me didn't want to admit that I was spooked. This was why I came out here, wasn't it? To face my fears, to be alone in the dark. I stayed, and that night the shadows came. The meteor shower was more intense on the second night, the sky alive with fire and light. I sat by the RV, staring up at the heavens, the vastness of the universe overwhelming. But no matter how beautiful the stars were, my eyes kept drifting back to the edges of the desert, where the darkness seemed to pool, thick and impenetrable. It was there, at the far edge of my vision, that I first saw the figure. A shape standing just beyond the reach of my campfire's light. At first, I thought it was a trick of the eye. The desert plays with your perception. Distances blur, shadows stretch. But when I blinked, the figure was still there, standing, watching. I grabbed my camera, adjusting the focus, snapping a shot before the figure disappeared. I wasn't sure what I was expecting. Maybe an animal or even another camper who'd wandered too close. But when I checked the camera's screen, my blood went cold. The figure wasn't human. It was tall. Too tall, with elongated limbs and a strange, distorted form. It was like a shadow brought to life, a smear of darkness against the starlit sky. The more I stared at it, the more unreal it looked. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I slowly lowered the camera. When I looked again, the figure was gone. The air was suddenly freezing, the kind of cold that bites at your skin. I retreated into the RV, locking the door behind me, my heart racing. I told myself I was imagining things. The desert played tricks on people. I'd read about it, people seeing things that weren't there, hearing voices carried on the wind. But that didn't explain the figure in the photo. The night dragged on, and I stayed awake, listening for anything, any sound, any movement. But all I heard was the persistent hum of the radio and the static growing louder by the minute. The next day, I knew I had to leave. Whatever was out there, it wasn't just my imagination. The figure, the voices, I couldn't explain it, and I didn't want to. I packed up as quickly as I could, but when I turned the key in the ignition, the RV sputtered and died. I tried again and again. Nothing. I stepped out into the desert, sweat pouring down my face. The heat was oppressive, and the silence pressed in on me, suffocating. I tried to call for help, but my phone had no signal, and the radio was useless, just a constant, garbled stream of static. Then the voice returned, louder than ever. "Stay. Come closer." It wasn't a whisper anymore, it was a command. and when I looked out across the desert I saw the figure again, closer this time, standing in the distance. Its form was hazy and indistinct, but unmistakable. It was waiting for me. My legs felt like lead as I backed toward the RV, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The air was freezing now, the warmth of the day gone, replaced by a bone-deep chill. I knew in that moment that if I stayed, I would become like the figure, a shadow, a ghost, trapped in this forsaken place, wandering the desert forever. I ran. I don't know how I got the RV started. Maybe it was adrenaline, or maybe sheer panic. But when the engine finally roared to life, I slammed the gas pedal to the floor and didn't look back. The figure, the voice, the cold, they all faded into the distance as I sped across the salt flats, the desert stretching endlessly behind me. I never looked at the photos again. I couldn't. Whatever was out there, it was better left unseen. I'll never return to Black Rock Desert. Some places were meant to be empty. I always thought the vastness of the desert would calm me. It's what I needed after everything that had happened at work, the constant pressure, the unrelenting deadlines, the suffocating feeling of being boxed into the same routine. I planned the trip to Big Bend National Park months ago, thinking a week away from it all would clear my head. Solitude in the desert seemed like the perfect way to hit the reset button. I'd heard the stories, of course, rumors of spiritual significance, whispered legends passed down by native tribes, but I'd never put much stock in that kind of thing. They were just stories, right? I was wrong. Big Bend is a place where the land meets the sky in such a dramatic way that it's almost unnerving. The sun bakes the earth by day, and at night the stars stretch endlessly, a canopy of light over the barren landscape. The silence is definite, and out here, far away from everything, it feels like the world is holding its breath. I arrived at the park late in the afternoon, the sun already beginning to dip behind the distant Chisos Mountains. My plan was simple: hike the trail to the window, a spot famous for its breathtaking sunset views. I'd set up camp, spend the night there, and continue deeper into the wilderness the next day. A week alone, away from the noise of civilization, I'd been craving this. Everything seemed perfect at first. The air was dry and warm, the trail rugged but manageable, and my gear was top-notch, a mix of high-end camping equipment and essentials I'd collected over the years. I felt prepared, confident, ready to let the desert cleanse my mind. But that feeling didn't last. By the time I reached my campsite, I noticed my GPS was flickering, the signal coming and going without explanation. I chalked it up to a glitch. Maybe the battery was low, though I had checked it before I left. Then my phone started to act strange. The battery, which had been at 80% when I arrived, drained rapidly, dropping to 20% in just a few minutes. No big deal, I thought. I wasn't here to use my phone. After all, this was supposed to be my escape from technology. As I set up my tent, the sun dipped below the horizon and the cold wind swept through the canyon. I hadn't expected the temperature to drop so quickly, and I fumbled through my pack for my jacket. My hands were shaking, and I wasn't sure if it was from the cold or something else. That's when I heard it, the first sign that something wasn't right. It was faint at first, just a whisper carried on the wind, so soft I thought I imagined it. But then it came again, rhythmic, almost like chanting, echoing through the canyon. I paused, holding my breath, straining to hear. There was nothing, just the sound of the wind. "Get it together, Tyler," I muttered to myself. I was overthinking things again, the wind through the rocks, that's all it was. My mind playing tricks on me, feeding into my anxieties like it always did. I finished setting up camp and tried to relax, but the uneasy feeling wouldn't leave me. The silence was oppressive, heavy, as if the desert itself was waiting for something. I tried to brush it off. I was just tired, exhausted, really. That night, as I lay in my tent, the whispers returned, louder this time, clearer. It wasn't the wind, it was something else, something real. The whispers grew, surrounding me, coming from every direction. They weren't in English, not even Spanish. It was an ancient language, guttural and rhythmic, like a chant I couldn't understand. I sat up in my sleeping bag, my heart racing. I reached for my flashlight, but when I clicked it on, the beam sputtered and died. My hands fumbled in the darkness, searching for my backup lantern. When I found it, I clicked it on, flooding the tent with light, but the whispers didn't stop. They only seemed to get closer. I tried to stay calm, telling myself it was just my imagination, but deep down I knew something was wrong. This wasn't just anxiety. Something was out there. I stepped outside. The cold air hit me like a slap to the face. The fire I'd built earlier had long since died down to embers. I looked around, scanning the landscape with my lantern. That's when I saw it. The small stone cairns, dozens of them, scattered around the edges of my campsite like tiny tombstones. They hadn't been there when I set up camp, I was sure of it. A chill ran down my spine. Someone had been here, or something. My mind raced. Could it have been other hikers? A prank, maybe? But the trail had been empty when I arrived, and this was an isolated spot. No one would have come this far just to mess with me. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. My hands were shaking as I backed toward my tent, the beam of my lantern swinging wildly across the ground. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a movement. A shadow just at the edge of the light, darting between the rocks. It was too fast to be human. My heart pounded in my chest as I swung the lantern around, trying to catch another glimpse, but there was nothing, just the empty desert. I bolted back into my tent, zipping it shut behind me, as if that thin layer of nylon could protect me from whatever was out there. I sat there, gripping the lantern, listening to the whispers fade into the distance. I didn't sleep that night. Every noise made my heart jump. Every gust of wind felt like something moving just outside. By morning, the whispers were gone, but the unease lingered. I packed up camp, deciding to cut my trip short. I'd head back to the trailhead, call it a failure, and go home. There was no shame in that. But as I started hiking back, something was off. The trail didn't look right. The landmarks, the rock formations, they weren't where they should have been. I pulled out my map, trying to orient myself, but nothing matched. It was like the land itself had shifted overnight. I checked my GPS, but the screen was blank, dead. My phone, too, had lost all power. Panic set in. I was lost, completely, utterly lost, in the middle of the desert. I forced myself to stay calm, to breathe. I could find my way back. I just retraced my steps. But no matter how far I walked, the landscape seemed to warp around me, twisting into unfamiliar shapes. My footprints, which should have been visible in the sand, were gone, erased, as if I'd never walked that way at all. The sun climbed higher in the sky, beating down on me, but the cold from the night before hadn't left. It clung to me, seeping into my bones, and then I saw it again. The shadow. It was further away this time, just a dark figure standing on the ridge, watching me. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. It was tall, impossibly tall and thin. I couldn't make out any features, just its silhouette against the sky. It didn't move. It didn't come closer. It just stood there, watching. I didn't know what it was, but I knew I had to get away from it. I turned and ran, my legs burning as I scrambled over the rocks, my pack bouncing against my back. But no matter how far I ran, the figure was always there, always just at the edge of my vision, standing still, waiting. My mind raced with the legends I'd read before the trip. Stories of Lala Hor, the evil hour, a spirit that lured travelers to their doom. It was said to appear just before tragedy struck, a warning of death. I hadn't believed in those stories, not really. But now, with the shadow stalking me, I wasn't so sure. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the desert. I was exhausted, my body aching, my mind frayed. I couldn't keep running. I had to face it. I stopped, turning to look at the ridge behind me. The shadow was closer now, standing still, its dark form blending with the rocks. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. "I'm not afraid," I said aloud, though my voice wavered. "I'm not afraid of you." The shadow didn't move, but I felt its presence, heavy and oppressive, weighing down on me. My heart raced, but I forced myself to stand my ground. Slowly, the figure began to fade, dissolving into the landscape like smoke. The whispers, too, faded into the wind, growing quieter until they were gone. I stood there for a long time, the desert silent once more. The sky darkened above me. I didn't know what just happened, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't stay here any longer. The next morning, I found the trail. The landscape had returned to normal, the landmarks in the right places, as if nothing had changed. I made my way back to the trailhead, my legs weak, my mind still spinning from the encounter. I left Big Bend that day, never to return. Some people might say it was just my imagination, that the isolation and the anxiety had gotten to me. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. The desert is a place of mystery, a place where the veil between worlds is thin, and sometimes something crosses over. When you spend enough time alone, the silence becomes something else. It's no longer a backdrop, but a living, breathing thing that creeps in around the edges of your thoughts. I thought I liked the silence. That's why I had been living on the road for months, with no one but myself and my RV for company. But this trip to Ocala National Forest was supposed to be different. I needed to reset, to get my head straight. I guess that's what they all say before they lose it. The first day was easy enough. I set up camp on the edge of the forest, not far from one of the swamps that ran through Ocala. I had picked this spot on purpose, far enough from the touristy campgrounds, but close enough to the water to take some good photos. Photography had become my new hobby, something to fill the long stretches of time, something to keep my mind off Rachel. The forest was thick with towering pines and oaks, their branches twisting and closing in overhead. The light filtered through the leaves in a way that made the air seem heavy, almost suffocating, but it was peaceful, or at least I told myself it was. I parked the RV near a clearing, right where the swamp met the woods. The ground was firm enough, and I didn't think much of the water nearby. I had no reason to worry, not yet. By the time I finished setting up, the sun was already dipping low, casting long shadows that stretched across the clearing. The air was unnervingly still, like the whole forest was holding its breath, but I didn't mind. Solitude was the whole point. I sat outside for a while, watching the last of the light fade before retreating inside the RV. The hum of the small generator I had hooked up was the only sound breaking the silence. Everything seemed fine. Everything was fine, until the light started flickering. It was subtle at first, just a dimming of the overhead lights. I figured the wiring was faulty, nothing I couldn't fix. I'm a mechanic by trade, after all. I ignored it, settling in with a book, trying to lose myself in the words. But then the flickering got worse. The lights flashed on and off in rapid succession. The shadows in the RV danced wildly before everything went dark. I sighed, more frustrated than anything, and grabbed my flashlight. After a few minutes of fumbling with the wires, I got the power back on. The light stabilized, but there was something else, a soft buzzing noise, faint just at the edge of hearing, like a distant hum. It might have been the swamp, maybe bugs, or just the generator straining, but it set me on edge. That night, I barely slept. The next morning, the unease I'd felt the night before was gone, replaced by a sense of calm. The sunlight was warm, and the swamp shimmered in the early light. I grabbed my camera and set out for a walk, looking for something worth capturing. Ocala was known for its beauty, the kind of untouched wilderness that's hard to find these days. But the deeper I walked into the woods, the more I realized something was off. It started small, little things I could have easily ignored. My compass acting up, the needle spinning lazily before settling in the wrong direction. The buzzing sound from the night before returned, louder now, seeming to come from all around me. I chalked it up to the swamp mosquitoes, maybe, or some malfunction with the generator still ringing in my ears. But when I came back to camp, I noticed the first real sign that something wasn't right. My gear, things I'd left on the picnic table outside, was scattered across the ground, not in a way that suggested wind either. The table had been cleared. My flashlight, the lantern, the tools I'd left out, all of them were scattered in a perfect line toward the swamp. I stopped, staring at the items. Someone had been here, or something. I'm not easily spooked, but my gut told me to get back inside, lock the doors. That night I sat in the RV, every light on, clutching a lantern just in case the power flickered again. I told myself it was fine. probably some animal. Bears get curious, right? But when the tapping started, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. It was soft at first, just a light tapping on the window, like something brushing against it. I glanced over, but didn't see anything. I convinced myself it was the wind, the branches moving in the breeze. But then the tapping came again and again. I grabbed my flashlight and opened the door, stepping out to the cold night air. The swamp smelled foul, like rot and decay, and the buzzing sound was back, louder than ever. I swept the beam of the flashlight across the clearing, and that's when I saw them. Footprints. Large, human-like prints, leading right up to the window of my RV. The mud was fresh, still wet from the swamp, and the prints were clear, but there were no other signs of anyone around, no trails leading away, just those prints stopping right at the window. Then nothing. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. I wanted to believe it was someone playing a prank, some camper messing with me, but I hadn't seen another soul since I got here. No cars at the trailhead, no signs of other campers nearby. I hurried back inside, locking the door, but I knew it wouldn't help. The feeling in my gut told me I was being watched. By the third day, I wanted out. I'd seen enough, but when I tried to start the RV, nothing happened. The engine clicked but wouldn't turn over. I tried again and again, but the RV refused to start. Panic settled in. My phone had no signal, this deep in the forest, and the nearest ranger station was miles away. The buzzing sound was louder now, constant, like a low hum in the back of my skull. I packed a bag and decided to hike out. Staying another night was out of the question. The trail was familiar enough, but something was different. The air was thick, stifling, and the swamp seemed to have crept closer. I hadn't noticed it before, but the water was rising, soaking the ground around my campsite. The once dried trail was now a muddy mess, slowing me down as I tried to navigate through the trees. And then I saw them. At first, they were just shadows moving between the trees, barely visible in the corner of my eye. I stopped, trying to focus, but every time I turned to look, they were gone. My heart raced. I pushed forward faster now, but the shadows followed me. They stayed just out of sight, flickering in and out of existence, like ghosts. By the time I reached the halfway point, the whispers started. It wasn't loud, just a faint, distant murmur, but it was unmistakable. Voices speaking in a language I didn't understand, too quiet to make out the words. I spun around, searching for the source, but there was nothing. Just the trees, the swamp, and those damn shadows. The trail blurred before my eyes, and I stumbled, my head swimming. I couldn't think straight. The buzzing, the whispers, it was too much. I needed to get out of here, but no matter which way I turned, the trail led me back to the swamp. It was like the forest was folding in on itself, trapping me in a maze of water and trees. My head throbbed, my vision blurred, and then I saw them. Standing at the edge of the swamp, barely visible in the twilight, were the figures. They were tall, too tall to be human, with elongated limbs and dark faces. They didn't move. They just stood there, watching me, their forms flickering in and out of the shadows, like something half-formed, not fully real. I backed away, my heart pounding, but they didn't follow. They didn't need to. The buzzing sound grew louder, the whispers more insistent. I turned and ran, not caring where the trail led. I just needed to get away. When I finally collapsed back at the RV, drenched in sweat and mud, the sun was already setting. The swamp had crept even closer, the water now lapping at the edges of the clearing. I locked myself inside, every light on, but it didn't matter. I could still hear them. The whispers, the tapping, the buzzing. It all grew louder, closing in on me from every side. I knew what was out there. I'd seen it, and it was only a matter of time before it got in. I sat there in the dark, clutching the flashlight, waiting. Waiting for the moment when the door would creak open, waiting for the shadows to finally step into the light. I don't know how long I sat there, hours, days. The buzzing is in my head now, a constant hum I can't escape. The figures are closer. I can see them outside, just beyond the trees. Their eyes are glowing in the darkness. They're waiting for me, and I'm not sure how much longer I can resist. I parked my RV deep in the Black Hills, farther than I'd ever dared to go before. The last sign of civilization had been a gas station over an hour back, and now it was just me, the trees, and the silence. And that was exactly what I wanted. Solitude. After the divorce, I craved it like a drug. I needed this trip to remind myself of who I used to be, before the arguments, before the failures, before the loneliness settled in like a slow-burning rod. Out here, surrounded by miles of forest, I'd find peace. At least that's what I told myself as I killed the engine, the sudden quiet swallowing me whole. I climbed out of the RV and stretched, breathing in the sharp, cold air. The Black Hills were breathtaking, tall, ancient pines rising like sentinels against the darkening sky. The wind was still, not even a rustle of leaves, just silence. I walked around the clearing, feeling the weight of the world lift ever so slightly with each step. This was why I loved the wilderness, the isolation, the escape. But there was something off this time, a heaviness in the air. I'd been here before, years ago, but it had never felt like this. I shook off the feeling. My mind was playing tricks on me. It had been a rough few months, and I wasn't thinking straight. A couple of nights out here would fix that. I busied myself with setting up camp, though I didn't have much to do. The RV had everything I needed. I lit a fire outside anyway, for old time's sake, and poured myself a drink. I sat on the fold-out chair and stared into the flames, letting the warmth pull me in. Then I heard it. A sound, faint at first, like tapping. I looked around, but there was nothing. Probably just the forest settling. I turned back to the fire, trying to relax, but the noise came again, rhythmic, deliberate this time. I couldn't shake it off. Animals, I muttered to myself, standing up and shining my flashlight into the trees. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the dense undergrowth. I scanned the edge of the forest, expecting to see a raccoon or a deer, but there was nothing. Just the trees, standing tall, unmoving. I took a deep breath and laughed. I was being paranoid. The first night alone always did this to me, made me jump at shadows. I headed back into the RV, locking the door behind me. That night I slept fitfully. Dreams of my ex-wife drifted through my mind, her face twisted in anger, her voice echoing in that same sharp, accusing tone I knew too well. I woke up several times, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding. By morning, the feeling of unease still clung to me like a damp fog. I tried to ignore it, pushing myself to enjoy the day. I spent the morning hiking, trying to lose myself in the familiar sights of the Black Hills, but it was hard to shake the feeling that something was wrong. The woods felt off, too quiet, too still. I returned to the RV just after midday, planning to settle in and enjoy a lazy afternoon. That's when the real problems began. The generator sputtered and died as I tried to start it up. I cursed, fiddling with the switch, but nothing happened. No power, no lights, and no heat. I wasn't worried yet. I couldn't figure it out. I always did, but the frustration simmered beneath the surface. I was already on edge, and the last thing I needed was for the RV to start malfunctioning. I grabbed my toolkit and went outside, working on the generator for what felt like hours. As I crouched next to the RV, I thought I heard footsteps behind me. I froze, wrench in hand, listening. There it was again, soft, slow steps, like someone was circling me. I whipped around, but the forest was empty. Just the same dense pines, standing silent, watching. "Get it together, Jack," I muttered, turning back to the generator. By dusk, I was back inside. The generator was still dead, and the RV was cold, but I told myself it was fine. I'd built a fire outside, so I didn't need heat in here. I sat by the fire again, staring out into the forest, hoping the flames would chase away the anxiety that had been building all day. That's when I saw them, shadows, just at the edge of the firelight. They were tall, thin, humanoid, but wrong somehow, too elongated, too stiff. They stood between the trees, unmoving, watching me. My breath caught in my throat as I blinked, thinking I was imagining things, but they didn't disappear. They were still there, standing in the shadows just beyond the fire. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice cracking. No response. The figures remained still, their hollow eyes fixed on me. I stood up slowly, grabbing the flashlight and shining it toward them, but the beam seemed to bounce off the darkness, unable to penetrate the trees. When I lowered the light, they were gone. I stumbled back into the RV, slamming the door behind me. My heart pounded in my chest as I paced the small space, my mind racing with possibilities. Had someone followed me out here? Were they messing with me? I grabbed my phone, only to find the battery drained, dead. The same with my watch. I was completely cut off. I tried to calm myself down, but the sense of dread was overwhelming. I felt like I was being watched, even inside the RV. I peeked out the window, expecting to see those figures again, but the clearing was empty. The fire outside was still burning, casting flickering shadows across the ground. I crawled into bed, wrapping myself in blankets to ward off the chill that had settled in. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, that I was jumping at shadows because of the divorce, because of the loneliness. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. I barely slept that night, and when I did, my dreams were filled with strange voices, whispers that sounded like my ex-wife, but hollow, distorted. She called to me from the darkness, telling me to come outside, to follow her into the trees. When I woke, I was drenched in sweat, my heart pounding. It was morning, but the RV was still freezing. I could see my breath fogging in the air. I had to leave. Something was wrong here, and I wasn't going to stick around to find out what. I threw my things together, ready to get the hell out of the Black Hills, but when I tried the engine, the RV wouldn't start. No matter how many times I turned the key, it sputtered and died. I slammed my fists against the steering wheel, panic rising in my chest. I grabbed my bag and rushed outside, but as soon as I stepped into the clearing, I froze. They were back. The figures, tall, hollow-eyed shadows, stood at the tree line surrounding the clearing. Dozens of them now, all watching me, waiting. I stumbled backward, my breath catching in my throat. The fire had burned out during the night, and the clearing was shrouded in a thick, unnatural fog. I had to get out of here. The figures didn't move as I grabbed my camping knife and marched toward the nearest tree, determined to hack my way out of this nightmare. I had seen strange carvings on some of the trees, symbols jagged and twisted. Maybe they had something to do with this, something to do with the figures. With trembling hands, I drove the blade into the bark, carving through the strange lines. As soon as I broke the symbol, the air shifted. The shadows flickered, and for a moment I thought I heard a low echo and wail. I didn't stop. I hacked at the trees, cutting through every symbol I could find. The voices in my head grew louder with each slash. My ex-wife's voice, distorted and hollow, begged me to stop, telling me to come into the forest, to let go. But I didn't listen. I couldn't. Finally, when I had cut through the last symbol, the air went still. The figures at the tree line melted away, dissolving into the fog. I stumbled back to the RV, my legs weak, my mind spinning. The engine roared to life on the first try. I sped out of the clearing, not daring to look back. The Black Hills vanished behind me, swallowed by the fog. But even now, as I write this, I can still feel them watching, waiting. The hollow ones never really let you go. I should have known better than to trust an unmarked road. After years of travel writing, you'd think I'd have a sharper instinct for bad decisions, but there I was, driving deeper into Guy Ford Pinchot National Forest, chasing a forgotten trail that was supposed to lead me to a ghost town no one could find anymore, vanished off the map. The ranger at the visitor center had said with a grin, "People go looking for it and never see it again. It's like the road just swallows you up." He laughed, but I could see the glint in his eye. He loved spinning those kinds of tales for tourists. But I wasn't a tourist. I was a writer, damn it. I had an assignment to finish, and there was no room for ghost stories. I followed the narrow, crumbling logging road as it wound deeper into the trees. My RV rattled along, tires crunching over fallen branches and loose gravel. The road narrowed, barely wide enough for my rig, but I kept going. I'd done my research, and this was the right way, even if the forest seemed determined to reclaim the path. It had been a long day, and I was eager to set up camp and relax before exploring the area the next morning. The further I went, the thicker the trees grew, their branches knitting together overhead, blotting out the late afternoon sun. My GPS had long since lost signal, but I didn't need it. I was prepared. I had maps. I was confident I didn't get lost easily. But as I rounded the last bend in the road, something changed. The sky had been clear earlier, but a dense fog was rolling in now, thick and fast. I could barely see 10 feet in front of me. The road, which had been clear just moments ago, seemed to dissolve into a grey blur. I slowed to a crawl, squinting through the windshield. Just up ahead, a small clearing appeared through the mist. It wasn't much, but it was enough room for me to park the RV. I didn't have many other options. I pulled in, killed the engine, and stepped outside. The fog clung to everything, making the air feel damp and cold. It shouldn't have been this cold, not in early fall. The chill crept into my bones, but I pushed it aside and started setting up camp. Something about the silence gnawed at me, though. No wind, no birds, no rustling leaves, just stillness in that damned fog. I finished my setup quickly, then retreated to the warmth of the RV. I wasn't nervous, but the quiet was getting under my skin. I grabbed a beer from the fridge, settled into the driver's seat, and pulled out my maps. I spread them across the dash, looking for my next move. The ghost town was supposed to be less than a mile away, hidden deep in the woods, down a trail that was barely marked. Tomorrow I'd hike to it, get my pictures, take some notes, and be done with it. Easy. But something was off. The road I'd driven on wasn't showing up on the map anymore. I traced the route with my finger, confused. The road was here. I'd just come down it, but now on the map it wasn't anywhere to be found. I leaned back in my seat, staring out the windshield at the fog-shrouded forest. The ranger's words echoed in my mind, vanished off the map. I laughed softly to myself. It was a joke, a tall tale to scare off amateur hikers, nothing more. Still, when I stepped outside to stretch my legs, I felt it again, that unsettling stillness. The fog was thicker now, curling around the RV like tendrils. I looked back toward the road I'd driven in on, but it wasn't there. I blinked, rubbed my eyes and stepped forward, peering into the mist. No road, just an unbroken line of trees. My stomach tightened. I walked a few more steps, hoping the road would reappear, but it didn't. The forest was dense, the trees close together. There was no sign of the path I had taken just hours earlier. It was as if it had been swallowed whole. I jogged back to the RV, heart racing now. I grabbed my flashlight and marched back to where the road should have been, sweeping the beam through the fog, but all I could see were trees, tall, dark, and oppressive. My breath fogged the air in front of me as I stood there, trying to make sense of it. The road couldn't just vanish. I hadn't gotten lost. I couldn't have. But when I turned back toward the RV, I felt it, that creeping sensation that I wasn't alone. I swung the flashlight around, heart pounding, and for a split second I thought I saw movement in the fog. A figure, tall and thin, slipping between the trees. "Hello?" My voice cracked. I regretted speaking as soon as the word left my mouth. The fog swallowed my voice, leaving nothing but silence in its wake. I scanned the tree line again. Nothing. I backed toward the RV, my nerves on edge, and hurried inside, locking the door behind me. I wasn't about to let a little fog and a missing road freak me out, but something felt wrong. The rational part of my brain was trying to make sense of it. Fog could play tricks on your eyes, and maybe I'd missed a turn somewhere. That was all. But deep down I wasn't convinced. I spent the next hour pacing the length of the RV, checking and rechecking my maps, trying to retrace my route in my head. Nothing made sense. The road had been there. I hadn't imagined it. By nightfall, the fog had thickened to the point where I couldn't see more than a few feet outside. The temperature had dropped even more, and I cranked up the RV's heater, wrapping myself in blankets. Sleep didn't come easily. I kept hearing things, soft thuds like footsteps outside, and whispers that seemed to drift through the walls. It had to be the fog, I told myself. It was distorting sound, making me paranoid. But when I woke in the middle of the night, there were voices. I sat up in bed, my breath catching in my throat. I could hear them, faint, murmuring voices coming from outside. I crawled to the front of the RV, heart hammering, and peered through the windshield. The figures were back. This time there were more of them. Shadows in the fog, standing still, watching. They were too far away to make out any details, but I could feel their eyes on me, cold, hollow eyes. I blinked, and they were gone. I scrambled to turn on the engine, but it sputtered and died. No power. The RV was silent, cold, and dark. I grabbed my flashlight and flicked it on, but the beam barely cut through the fog. I tried to stay calm, tried to think logically, but my heart was racing, my mind spiraling into panic. The road was gone, the figures were back, and now I was trapped here. I had to get out. I grabbed my jacket and burst out of the RV. The cold hit me like a slab. I marched toward where the road had been, determined to find it, but the forest had shifted. The trees were closer now, the fog denser. I walked for what felt like hours, but the landscape stayed the same. It was as if I was walking in circles. No matter which way I turned, I kept ending up back at the RV. I could hear the voices again, closer now. They echoed through the fog, indistinct and ghostly. My flashlight flickered, and the shadows appeared again, closer this time, standing just beyond the beam of light. I ran back to the RV, slamming the door behind me, my chest heaving. The figures were out there, circling me, waiting. I don't know how long I sat there, clutching the flashlight, waiting for something to happen. The fog pressed against the windows, and the shadows loomed outside, never coming closer, but never leaving. Morning came, though I could barely tell. The fog hadn't lifted, and the road was still gone. I tried the engine again, and this time it roared to life. Relief washed over me, but it was fleeting. I turned the RV around, driving slowly back the way I'd come. If the road was there, I couldn't see it. All I could do was follow the same path I'd taken before, hoping it would lead me out. But it didn't. The road stretched out endlessly in front of me, a straight line through the fog, leading nowhere. And as I drove, I realized with sinking dread that I was still trapped. The road hadn't taken me anywhere. I was driving in circles, and the figures were still there, watching, waiting. They had me now. The vanishing road wasn't just a story. It was real, and I wasn't getting out. My name is Patrick Hamilton, and I'm 29 years old. This happened in the spring of last year, and not a day has gone by that I don't think about it. It started as a harmless idea, a camping trip to Kaymore Trail in West Virginia, with my boyfriend Sam, my best friend Derek, and his girlfriend Tina. I wanted content for my YouTube channel, where I explore eerie, offbeat places. This trip would change my life. We rolled into Phil just after noon, our RV kicking up dust as we parked near the trailhead. Kaymore was a legend, an old mining town buried deep in the woods, abandoned for decades. The locals whispered about disappearances, ghost sightings, and curses, but I chalked it up to superstition. A good story, I thought, nothing more. Sam, 30 and the most grounded of us, frowned at the map. "Trail looks rough. You sure we're ready for this?" "Of course," I said, adjusting the strap on my camera bag. "It's a couple of miles in and we're only staying overnight. We'll be fine." Tina, 26, was already uneasy. "I don't know, Patrick. I read that people hear things out there, like mining sounds, tools, voices." "That's the point," I replied, brushing it off. Derek, 29, my partner in crime for every harebrained adventure, grinned. "We're here to find something creepy." He slung his bag over his shoulder and headed down the trail. The hike to the site was harder than I'd anticipated. The trail was steep, overgrown in places, and unmarked where landslides had swallowed parts of it. By the time we reached the remnants of Kaymore, the sun was low, and a cool mist was rolling in. We set up camp near the ruins of an old mining structure, just a skeleton of rusted metal and rotting wood. It didn't take long for things to go wrong. "Damn it," Sam cursed as he unpacked his tent. "The poles are bent. This thing's useless." "Use the tarp," I suggested, already fiddling with my camera. That's when I noticed the battery meter drained. I charged it before we left. "Mine's doing it too," Tina said, holding up a flickering flashlight. "Great," Derek muttered. "Ghosts hate LED lights, huh?" The first oddity came as we explored. Derek found an old miner's helmet lying on a collapsed beam. It was perfect for the video. I took out my phone to snap a picture, but by the time I turned back, the helmet was gone. "You moved it," I said. "I didn't touch it," Derek replied, his grin fading from his face. Later, as we sat by the fire, Tina froze. "Did you hear that?" "Hear what?" I asked. She pointed into the trees. "Tapping, like metal on stone." We listened. At first, nothing. Then, faint and rhythmic, a metallic clang echoed from the direction of the mine shaft. It sounded like pickaxes, steady and deliberate. "Probably the wind," I said, but Sam's expression told me he wasn't convinced. The tapping grew louder as the night deepened. Derek, ever the skeptic, stood up and called into the woods. "Hey, ghost miners, we brought beer." "Shut up, Derek," Tina hissed. Sam scanned the tree line with his flashlight. "It's not the wind," he said, his voice tight. "Something's out there." Shadows flickered between the trees, but whenever the light hit them there was nothing, just the whisper of leaves in the breeze. Then the footsteps started, heavy, slow, deliberate, coming closer. We huddled by the fire. Tina clutched Derek's arm, and even he had gone pale. A figure emerged from the darkness, a man-shaped silhouette, blacker than the shadows around it, with hollow pits where its eyes should have been. "Back away," Sam whispered, gripping a branch from the fire as a makeshift weapon. The figure stopped just outside the firelight. Its head cocked unnaturally to one side. It raised a hand, skeletal and clawed, and gestured toward the mineshaft. "Patrick," Tina whispered. "I think it wants us to go." "No way," Derek said. "We're staying right here." The figure stepped back into the darkness and disappeared. But the tapping continued, louder now, as though daring us to follow. Against better judgment, we ventured toward the mine. At dawn, we couldn't leave without understanding what had happened, or so I told myself. The air grew colder as we approached, and the tapping grew louder. Inside the mine, the walls were slick with moisture, and the air smelled of rust and decay. We found the shrine in a cavern near the back. Candles had burned themselves out, their wax frozen in grotesque shapes. Symbols covered the walls, spiraling and chaotic. A rusted pickaxe leaned against a stone altar, and at its center sat a doll made of twigs and cloth. "It's a curse," Tina said, her voice trembling. "The miners disturbed something they shouldn't have, and now they're trapped here." "It's just old junk," I said, though my voice sounded hollow. I reached for the doll. "Patrick, don't," Sam shouted, but it was too late. The moment my fingers brushed the fabric, the ground shook, and the mine roared with the sound of collapsing stone. The shadows came alive. Figures with hollow eyes emerged from every corner, their forms shifting like smoke but solid enough to trap us. Tina screamed as one reached for her, its clawed hand grazing her shoulder and leaving a welt. Derek swung his flashlight wild, the beam cutting through the darkness, but not the figures. "We need to leave," something Tina sobbed, "an offering to the shrine." "It's not real," I shouted, though even I wasn't sure anymore. The spirits were closing in, their hollow eyes fixed on us. Derek threw his watch onto the altar. Take it and let us go." Nothing happened. The spirits advanced. "Patrick!" Sam shouted, his voice desperate. "Do it! Leave the camera!" I hesitated. This camera was my livelihood, my passion, but the figures were reaching for us, their claws outstretched. I set the camera on the altar, my hands shaking. Tina knelt, whispering a prayer. The figures froze. Slowly they began to dissolve, their forms fading into the walls of the mine. The tapping stopped, the air grew still. We stumbled out of the mine, battered and shaken, but alive. No one spoke as we packed up camp. The journey back to the RV was a blur, the trail almost unrecognizable in the daylight. The only sound was Tina's quiet sobbing. Back home, I tried to edit the footage from my phone. The files were corrupted, filled with static and shadows that shifted unnaturally. When I unpacked my bag, I found my camera sitting inside, perfectly intact. But when I turned it on, the only image it showed was the shrine, the twig doll staring back at me with hollow eyes. I haven't been back to Camorr. I don't think I ever will. Some things are better left undisturbed. My name is Jacob Perez, and in the spring of 2005, I took my RV out to Idaho's remote Sawtooth National Forest. After a 20-year career in construction, I was ready for some quiet. At least, that's what I thought. I picked a spot way off the main camping loops, down a twisting gravel road that didn't look like it had seen a vehicle in years. Just me, my RV, and a couple of fishing rods. The first few days were paradise. I fished, hiked, and even managed to make myself laugh with my attempts at gourmet cooking over a campfire. It was as close to heaven as I could imagine. But then things got strange. It started with little stuff. Twigs snapping too close to the RV at night, muffled noises that I chalked up to animals. I ignored it, figuring a few critters weren't going to scare me off. On the third night, though, it got harder to ignore. Around midnight, I was jolted awake by a scratching sound against the side of the RV. I thought it might be a bear, so I flipped on the outside lights and scanned the clearing, but there was nothing there. Just the empty darkness of the forest, so quiet it felt wrong. The next morning, I decided to go for a hike, hoping a long walk would shake off the weird vibes. I packed a lunch, stuffed my water bottle in my backpack, and headed toward a small clearing I'd scouted out earlier. As I made my way through the thick pines, I stumbled upon something that stopped me cold. A pile of bones. They looked too big to be from a small animal, maybe even human, but they were picked clean. I had no intention of sticking around to investigate. I backtracked fast, my mind racing. Could be an animal graveyard, I told myself, maybe a predator's leftovers. But the whole way back, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Every crunch of leaves felt magnified. Every rustle in the bushes set me on edge. By the time I made it back to the RV, I was sweating, and not from the hike. That night I double-locked the RV door and kept my flashlight within arm's reach. It was a stupid comfort, but somehow it made me feel like I had some control. Around midnight the scratching came again. Only this time it was louder, more insistent, like nails scraping down the side of the vehicle. I froze, listening as it moved from the back of the RV toward the door. The flashlight felt useless in my hand. I wanted to yell to scare off whatever was outside, but the fear locked my voice in my throat. Then a heavy thud against the door. I practically jumped out of my skin. The scratching stopped, replaced by a low chuckle. Not a wild animal, not even close. I didn't sleep at all that night. By dawn I was a wreck, but I wasn't about to sit around and wait to be terrorized. I packed up my gear and planned to leave right then and there. But when I went to start the RV, the engine just sputtered. I tried again. Nothing. My hands shook as I opened the hood. Wires had been yanked clean out, some of them twisted into knots. Whoever or whatever was messing with me was playing a sick game. There was no choice but to hike out. I grabbed my bag, the flashlight, and a hunting knife I'd stashed in a drawer and headed toward the main road, hoping I'd find someone who could give me a ride to the nearest town. The hike felt endless, the silence around me oppressive. After about an hour, I heard footsteps behind me, soft and measured, like someone was deliberately following at a distance. I stopped, turned around, but there was no one there. Nothing but trees, shadows, and that gnawing sense of dread. I tried to laugh it off, figured I was just scaring myself. But then the footsteps picked up again, faster this time, closing the distance between us. I didn't wait. I bolted forward, heart pounding, barely aware of the ground under my feet. I stumbled into a clearing, lungs burning, vision tunneling. I had no idea where I was going, but anywhere was better than right there. The forest closed in around me, dense and dark, every shadow a potential threat. Just when I thought I'd lost him, I stumbled into another clearing, and he was waiting there, grinning like he knew exactly where I'd end up. I backed up, glancing around, desperate for any kind of weapon. My hand closed around a thick branch, and I swung it with everything I had. It connected with his shoulder, and he staggered, but he didn't go down. Instead, he laughed, a harsh guttural sound that echoed in the trees. "You're not the first one I've caught out here," he sneered, his voice low and mocking, "and you won't be the last." He lunged, knife slashing toward me again. I blocked with the branch, but his strength was relentless, his movements practiced, like he'd done this 100 times. My mind raced. He wasn't just some lunatic. He was experienced, deliberate, a predator who knew these woods like the back of his hand. We circled each other, him taunting me, my every nerve on edge. Suddenly, he lunged too close, and I managed to shove him backward, knocking him off his feet. Without waiting to see if he'd get back up, I turned and sprinted. fueled by pure survival instinct. I broke through the trees, finally reaching the main road. A car was coming down the road, and I ran in front of it, waving my arms. The driver, a middle-aged woman with wide eyes and a confused expression, slammed on the brakes, and I threw myself into the passenger seat, shouting for her to go. She didn't ask questions. She just hit the gas, and we sped away, leaving the forest and the nightmare behind. As we drove, I glanced back, half expecting to see him standing there watching us go. But the road was empty, the forest silent. When we reached the nearest town, I thanked the woman and called the sheriff. They sent a team out to investigate, but by the time they reached my campsite, it had been ransacked, the RV torn apart. In the clearing where I'd last seen him, they found more bones, old and new, scattered like some kind of twisted collection. The sheriff told me later they'd been trying to catch a man named Jonah Gray, a backwoods drifter who'd been linked to missing persons cases in 3 states. They never found him, though. Not in the woods. Not anywhere. I didn't stick around to find out if they ever did. I came to Tar Hollow State Forest to find myself again after the accident. I'd lost my confidence, my edge. Guiding people through the wilderness had been my passion. But that day, when the storm came out of nowhere and I made the wrong call, it left me shaken. Now I felt like an imposter, a fraud who couldn't trust her own instincts. The forest was supposed to help me, its quiet strength, its endless trails, its simplicity. I needed that. I parked my RV at a secluded site near Pine Lake, away from the few other campers who might still be around this late in the season. The forest was a cocoon of orange and gold, the leaves starting their slow march toward winter. It was beautiful, peaceful, until it wasn't. The first night started with the light. I was sitting by the fire, watching the flames dance and listening to the occasional rustle of the forest, when I noticed it. A faint glow deep in the trees, bobbing gently like a firefly. At first I thought it was someone with a flashlight, another camper maybe, or a park ranger making rounds. But the light didn't behave like it should. It moved too smoothly, weaving between the trees in slow, deliberate arcs. I stood, trying to get a better look. "Hello!" I called, my voice cutting through the stillness. The light paused for a moment. It hung there, hovering just beyond the firelight's reach, before slowly drifting farther into the forest. "Okay," I muttered to myself. Weird, but probably nothing. Still, I couldn't shake the unease that crept up my spine. I stoked the fire, locked the RV door, and crawled into bed. The next day, I tried to push the memory of the light away. I hiked along the Pine Run Trail, letting the rhythm of my steps and the crisp autumn air clear my head. That's when I met Jared. He was standing at the edge of the trail, staring out over the ravine below, tall, with a scruffy beard and a pack that looked like it had seen better days. He greeted me with a casual nod. "Not many people out here this time of year," he said, his voice warm but edged with something I couldn't quite place. "Yeah," I replied. "It's nice, quiet." We fell into step together, and as we walked he started talking about the forest, the trails, the wildlife, the history. It was clear he knew the place well. "Ever heard of the Lantern Man?" he asked suddenly, his tone shifting. "The what?" He gestured to the trees around us. "It's an old story. Supposedly there's a ghost that haunts these woods, a man carrying a lantern searching for lost souls. People say he died out here a long time ago, and now he leads others to their deaths." I laughed, but it came out hollow. "That sounds like something out of a campfire story." Jared shrugged. "Maybe, but a lot of people have seen the light." He glanced at me. "If you do, don't follow it, no matter what." That night, the light came back. I was in bed, half asleep, when I saw it through the window, a faint glow drifting between the trees. My heart started to pound. It was the same light as before, but this time it was closer. The whispers began a moment later, soft, faint, just on the edge of hearing. At first I thought it was the wind, but the longer I listened, the clearer they became. "Come," they murmured. I froze. How did they know my name? The light moved closer, the whispers growing louder. My head throbbed with their insistent pull, like they were burrowing into my skull. Before I knew what I was doing, I was out of bed, slipping on my boots and stepping out into the night. The forest was suffocating in its silence. The light hovered just ahead, its glow soft and steady. The whispers guided me, their words a jumbled mixture of pleas and commands. I followed the light down an overgrown path, my legs moving of their own accord. The air grew colder, heavier. The trees pressed in around me, like they were alive. And then I saw it, a small cemetery hidden deep in the woods, surrounded by a crumbling stone wall. The graves were old, their markers weathered and leaning. In the centre of the cemetery hung a rusted lantern, its glass cracked, but its light still burning. "Hello!" I called, my voice trembling. There was no response, only the creak of the lantern swinging gently in the breeze. I took a step closer. "Don't," a voice behind me warned. I spun around, my flashlight catching Jared's face. "How? What are you doing here?" I stammered. "You need to leave," he said, his voice urgent. "Now, what's going on? What is this place?" Jared didn't answer. He grabbed my arm, pulling me away from the lantern. But before we could leave, the forest erupted with light. The lantern man appeared. He was tall and gaunt, his body shrouded in tattered fabric that seemed to shift and rise like smoke. His face was obscured, but his eyes burned with a pale, ghostly light. The whispers started again, louder now, filling my head with static. "Stay," the lantern man said, his voice a low, rumbling growl. I couldn't move. The light from his lantern wrapped around me like a tether, pulling me toward him. My legs felt like lead, and my mind clouded with fear and confusion. Jared shouted something, but I couldn't hear him over the roar of the whispers. The lantern man raised his hand, and the light grew brighter, blinding. I don't know how I broke free. Maybe it was Jared pulling me away, or maybe it was something inside me, some primal survival instinct kicking in. All I know is that one moment I was frozen, and the next I was running. We tore through the forest, the lantern man's glow chasing us. The whispers clawed at my mind. My lungs burned, my legs screamed in protest, but I didn't stop. When we finally reached the RV, I threw myself inside, slamming the door shut behind me. Jared was gone. The forest was still. When I woke the next morning, the light, the whispers, the lantern man, they were gone. But the memory of them lingered, a weight I couldn't shake. I left Tar Hollow that day, vowing never to return. But sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet and the shadows grow long, I see a faint glow in the distance, and I wonder if the lantern man is still waiting for me. My name is Ronald Wood, and I was 29 when it happened. It was late October, crisp and cold, and I had planned the camping trip as a way to reconnect with my younger brother Ethan and shake off the stress of my job. We decided on Dolly Sod's Wilderness in West Virginia, a place famous for its stark beauty, rocky plateaus, and remote isolation. It sounded perfect. Too perfect, in hindsight. Ethan was 24, full of energy and always pushing boundaries, while I was the cautious one. This trip was supposed to be a chance to bridge the gap between us, especially after years of tension. My best friend Vanessa came along too. At 29, she was the kind of person who believed in crystals and spirits, which I always found a bit silly. But she was kind, and I thought she'd help balance Ethan's impulsiveness with her calming presence. We loaded up my RV early one Friday morning and drove to the trailhead. Ethan was already irritating me, of course. He'd forgotten decent hiking boots, so he had to wear his worn-out sneakers. I made a snide comment about him not taking things seriously, and he fired back with a sarcastic joke about me being the trip dictator. Vanessa stepped in to diffuse things as usual, and we rolled into the parking area with an uneasy truce. The wilderness was stunning at first. Fog curled low over the rocky ground, and the stunted trees were stark against the pale sky. It felt like we'd stepped into another world. We planned to hike a loop trail over 3 days, camping 2 nights before returning to the RV. It was remote enough to guarantee no cell service, but not so far off the beaten path that I felt unsafe. That's what I thought, anyway. We set up camp as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in streaks of orange and purple. Everything was unnaturally quiet. No wind, no rustling leaves, no birds. Vanessa noticed it first, commenting on how strange it was. Ethan shrugged it off, saying it was just a quiet forest. I told her not to worry, but the silence bothered me too. That night, the unease grew. I woke to a faint tapping on the RV's windows. Tap, tap, tap. At first, I thought it was a branch. Then I realized there were no trees close enough to touch the RV. I nudged Vanessa, who was asleep next to me, but the noise stopped as soon as I moved. I sat frozen in the dark, listening until exhaustion finally pulled me back under. In the morning, Ethan claimed he'd seen someone in the woods while he was stoking the fire. Tall guy, weird-looking. He was just standing there, staring at us, he said, grinning like it was a joke. I told him not to make things up to freak Vanessa out, but he insisted it was true. Whatever, I said, brushing him off, probably another hiker. The next day, I made the mistake of leading us off the main trail. I wanted to find a hidden vista I'd read about online, something with a great view of the valley below. The overgrown path I chose wasn't marked on any map, but I was confident we'd find our way back. We didn't. After about an hour, we stumbled into a clearing littered with bones, deer, rabbits, maybe other animals I couldn't identify. They were arranged in a spiral pattern, bleached white and perfectly placed, like some twisted art installation. Ethan laughed nervously and joked about hillbilly voodoo, but Vanessa looked pale. "We shouldn't be here," she said, clutching the quartz necklace she always wore. I agreed for once. We turned back, but the feeling of wrongness stayed with us. By the time we reached camp and the sun was setting, I was exhausted. My legs ached, and the tension between Ethan and me had worsened. He'd spent the entire afternoon mocking my decision to leave the main trail, calling me Captain Compass and pointing out how lost we'd been. We ate in silence, the fire crackling in the growing dark. Vanessa stayed quiet too, staring out into the woods. "There's something out there," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Something watching us." "Jesus, Vanessa," Ethan groaned. "Not this skinwalker crap again." She shot him a sharp look. "Don't say their name," she hissed. "Skinwalkers," Ethan said, grinning as he leaned closer to her. "Skinwalkers," I rolled my eyes and told them both to knock it off. But as the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that Vanessa was right. The forest seemed alive with shadows shifting just beyond the firelight. I told myself it was my imagination, but then I heard it, my voice calling from the woods. "Ronald." It was faint but unmistakable. "Ronald, help me." My blood ran cold. I looked at Vanessa, who had gone rigid. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. She nodded. "It's not real," she said quickly. "Whatever you do, don't go out there." But Ethan, of course, didn't listen. "Relax," he said. "It's probably just an echo or something." He grabbed his flashlight and started toward the tree line. "Ethan, stop!" I shouted, but he was already moving. He didn't get far. As soon as he stepped past the first row of trees, a figure emerged from the shadows. It looked human at first, tall and gaunt, with long limbs and pale skin. But as the light hit its face, I realized it wasn't human at all. Its features were stretched and distorted, like a grotesque mask. Its eyes were hollow, empty pits. "Ethan," I whispered, but he was frozen, staring at the thing. The creature tilted its head, then opened its mouth. "Ronald," it said in a warped, guttural voice that mimicked mine perfectly. Ethan stumbled back, dropping his flashlight. The beam swung wildly, catching glimpses of claws and sharp, uneven teeth. The creature stepped forward, its joints bending unnaturally, and I grabbed Ethan, yanking him back toward the fire. We barricaded ourselves in the RV, locking the doors and pulling the curtains shut. The creature followed, circling the vehicle. Its clawed fingers scraped against the metal, slow and deliberate. It whispered our names, mimicking each of us in turn. Vanessa was shaking, clutching her necklace and muttering what sounded like a prayer. "It's a skinwalker," she said, her voice trembling. "It's trying to lure us out." "What do we do?" I asked, my heart pounding. "Salt," she said suddenly. "Do we have salt?" I scrambled through the cabinets until I found a shaker. Vanessa grabbed it and began sprinkling it around the doors and windows, chanting softly. The scratching stopped, but the whispers grew louder, more desperate. Ethan, pale and shaking, stared at the door. "It's not going to leave, is it?" "No," Vanessa said grimly. Not unless we drive. But the RV wouldn't start. I turned the key again and again, but the engine only sputtered. Outside, the creature howled, a low, guttural sound that made my skin crawl. We stayed locked in the RV all night, listening to the creature pacing outside. At one point, it stopped whispering and began banging on the walls, hard enough to make the vehicle shake. Vanessa kept chanting, clutching her necklace like a lifeline. At dawn, the noises stopped. The forest was silent again, eerily so. When I tried the engine, it roared to life like nothing had happened. We didn't waste any time. I threw the RV into gear and we sped down the dirt road, not looking back. As we reached the main road, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The creature was standing at the edge of the forest, watching us. Its hollow eyes seemed to follow us even as we drove away. Ethan hasn't spoken about that night since it happened. Vanessa refuses to go camping ever again. As for me, I can't forget the way it mimicked my voice. Sometimes when I'm alone, I hear it again, soft and distant, calling my name. Ronald, help me. I'll never go back to Dolly Sods, and if you're smart, neither will you.